In a fog-shrouded manor on the desolate Yorkshire moors, a blood-stained scarf lies in a locked room, its owner vanished without a trace. Hercule Poirot, the master detective, is summoned to unravel a crime that defies logic, a chilling puzzle of disappearing guests, cryptic symbols, and a cursed jewel called the Raven's Rose. As secrets unravel and danger stalks Ravenwood Manor, Poirot's little grey cells face their greatest challenge to expose a cunning killer before the next victim vanishes into the night. Chapter 1. The Enigmatic Invitation. The autumn wind howled across the grey London skyline, rattling the windows of Hercule Poirot's impeccably ordered flat at Whitehaven Mansions. The little Belgian detective sat in his armchair, his small, neat hands folded over a steaming cup of tisane, his eyes fixed on the flickering flames in the fireplace. The room was a study in precision, every book on the shelf aligned, every cushion symmetrically placed, and the air scented faintly with lavender from a discreet diffuser. Order and method, Poirot often said, were the cornerstones of a clear mind. Yet this evening his mind was not entirely at ease. A letter lay on the polished mahogany table beside him, its envelope bearing a crest he did not immediately recognize, Raven clutching a rose in its talons. The paper was heavy, expensive, and the handwriting bold yet elegant, as though penned by someone accustomed to command. Poirot's moustache twitched as he considered it for the third time that hour. The letter had arrived that morning, delivered by a courier who vanished into the London fog before Poirot's valet, George, could inquire further. Its contents were as intriguing as they were perplexing. My dear Monsieur Poirot, I trust this missive finds you in good health and spirits. You are cordially invited to Ravenwood Manor, my estate in the wilds of Yorkshire, for a weekend gathering, commencing this Friday. The occasion is one of celebration, but I fear it may also be one of peril. I have reason to believe that a most extraordinary crime may unfold under my roof. Your reputation as a man of unparalleled intellect precedes you, and I humbly request your presence to forestall any calamity. Discretion, of course, is paramount. A car will collect you at 9 a.m. sharp. Yours sincerely, Sir Reginald Harrow. Poirot sipped his tisane, his sharp green eyes narrowing. Sir Reginald Harrow, the name was familiar, though not intimately so. A titan of industry, a man whose steel empire had forged railroads and bridges across the empire, yet whose personal life remained shrouded in mystery. Why would such a man summon Hercule Poirot, the detective who prided himself on unraveling the impossible, for a mere weekend gathering? And why this vague allusion to peril? The letter's tone suggested urgency, yet it lacked specifics, a deliberate omission, perhaps, to pique his curiosity. George, Poirot called, his voice crisp but not unkind. His valet appeared promptly, a tall, stoic figure in a pressed suit. Yes, sir. This, Sir Reginald Harrow. What do you know of him? George cleared his throat, ever the model of British restraint. A wealthy gentleman, sir. Owns Harrow Wilkes' widower, I believe, with no children, keeps to himself. Mostly, though there was some talk in the papers a few years back about a dispute with a business partner. Lives in Yorkshire, at Ravenwood Manor, as the letter suggests. Rather grand place, by all accounts. Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. And this manor, George, is it isolated? Very much so, sir. Miles from the nearest village, surrounded by moors, not the sort of place one stumbles upon by chance. Bon, Poirot murmured. And this crest, the raven and the rose. It is distinctive. No, indeed, sir. The Harrow family crest, I believe. Old family, though Sir Reginald is the last of the line. Poirot set down his cup and rose, his movements precise yet graceful. He crossed to the window, peering out at the gaslit street below. The fog was thickening, curling like a living thing around the lampposts. A crime that defies logic, he thought. The phrase from the letter lingered in his mind, a challenge to his little grey cells. He did not believe in the supernatural, nor in coincidences. If Sir Reginald feared a crime, there was a human hand behind it, a hand Poirot intended to expose. "Prepare my valise, George," he said at last. "We depart for Yorkshire in the morning." The journey to Ravenwood Manor was as arduous as it was picturesque. The car, sleek, black Rolls Roycer, arrived promptly at 9. Driven by a silent man in a peaked cap who offered no name and answered Poirot's polite inquiries with monosyllables. The road wound north through rolling hills, past fields of grazing sheep and stone walls weathered by centuries. By late afternoon, the landscape grew wilder, the hills giving way to vast, desolate moors that stretched to the horizon. The air grew colder, and Poirot adjusted his scarf, his gloved hands clutching a small notebook where he had begun jotting observations. The manor itself appeared suddenly, as though conjured from the mist. It loomed at the end of a long gravel drive, a sprawling edifice of grey stone with turrets that pierced the low clouds. Ivy clung to its walls, and the windows glowed faintly, like eyes watching the approaching car. The Ravenandro's crest adorned the iron gates, which creaked, open as if by some unseen mechanism. Poirot stepped out, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel. The driver unloaded his valise and departed without a word, leaving Poirot alone before the manor's imposing doors. He adjusted his hat, smoothed his moustache, and rang the bell. The sound echoed within, deep and resonant, like a warning. The door opened to reveal a butler, an elderly man with a face as lined as the moors themselves. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume," he said, his voice formal but tinged with wariness. "Oui, c'est moi, Poirot," replied, offering a slight bow. "And you are Graves, sir, the butler. Sir Reginald is expecting you. Please, follow me." The entrance hall was grand, its walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced Harrows, their eyes seeming to follow Poirot as he crossed the marble floor. A chandelier glittered above, casting shadows that danced like spectres. Graves led him through a series of corridors, each lined with tapestries and artifacts, vases, statues, and curious relics that spoke of wealth and eccentricity. Poirot's keen eyes noted a small jade figurine of a raven, its beak clutching what appeared to be a ruby rose. The crest again, he thought. They reached a drawing room where a fire roared in a massive hearth. Sir Reginald Harrow stood before it, a tall man in his late 60s, his hair silver but his posture ramrod straight. His suit was impeccably tailored, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. He turned as Poirot entered, his face breaking into a practiced smile. "Monsieur Poirot, what an honour," he said, extending a hand. "I trust your journey was pleasant." "Pleasant enough," Sir Reginald Poirot replied, shaking the offered hand. "Though I confess, your letter has left me most curious. You speak of peril, yet you provide no details. It is not, perhaps, the most conventional invitation." Sir Reginald chuckled, though it lacked warmth. "Straight to the point, eh? I admire that. Come, let us sit, and I shall explain, though I warn you, the matter is delicate." They settled. into leather armchairs, and Graves poured tea before retreating. Sir Reginald leaned forward, his voice lowering. I have invited a small group of guests this weekend, friends, associates, and one or two less savory characters. It is a celebration of sorts to mark the acquisition of a rare artifact for my collection. But I have received ... warnings. Poirot's eyebrows arched. Anonymous note, Sir Reginald said, producing a folded paper from his pocket. He handed it to Poirot, who unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was jagged, as though written in haste. The raven will bleed, and the rose will wither. Leave Ravenwood, or death will follow. Poirot studied the note, his fingers tracing the ink. And you believe this threat is credible? I do, Sir Reginald said. There have been incidents, strange noises at night, objects moved, and, well, I shan't bore you with rumours of curses. But I fear someone among my guests may have ill intentions. That is why I need you, Monsieur Poirot, to observe, to deduce, and, if necessary, to prevent a tragedy. Poirot folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. And who, pray, are these guests? Sir Reginald hesitated, then began. There is Lady Clara Beaumont, a widow and an old friend of the family. Charming, but sharp as a tack. Dr. Malcolm Vance, a historian with an interest in my artifact collection. Miss Evelyn Shaw, a young heiress and my distant cousin. Mr. Julian Carver, a business rival, though we've reached an uneasy truce. And Miss Irene Duval, a French actress of some renown, who, ... Well, let us say she has a complicated history with me. Poirot nodded, committing the names to memory. And the artifact you mentioned? Sir Reginald's eyes gleamed. The Raven's Rose, a jewel said to be cursed, dating back to the Crusades. It is priceless, both in value and history. I acquired it recently, at great expense. A cursed jewel, Poirot mused, his tone neutral. And you believe this may be the motive for your peril? Perhaps, Sir Reginald said, or perhaps it is merely a pretext. That is for you to uncover. Before Poirot could press further, the door opened and a woman entered. She was striking, with auburn hair pinned elegantly and a dress of emerald silk that shimmered in the firelight. Her eyes, however, were cold, assessing Poirot with a glance. Lady Clara, Sir Reginald said, rising. May I present Monsieur Hercule Poirot? Lady Clara Beaumont smiled, though it did not reach her eyes. The famous detective. How intriguing. I hope you're not here to spoil our little party, monsieur. On the contrary, Madame Poirot said, bowing. I am here to ensure it proceeds without ... incident. Her laugh was light but brittle. Then you have your work cut out for you. Ravenwood has a way of surprising its guests. The evening progressed with the arrival of the other guests, each bringing their own air of mystery. Dr. Malcolm Vance was a wiry man with spectacles and a nervous habit of adjusting his tie. Miss Evelyn Shaw was a vision of youth, her blonde curls and wide eyes belying a sharp wit. Mr. Julian Carver, broad-shouldered and brusque, carried himself like a man accustomed to winning. Miss Irene Duval, the actress, was all charm and theatricality, her French accent lilting as she regaled the group with tales of the Paris stage. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have housed a small army. The table was set with crystal and silver, and a massive chandelier hung above, its candles casting long shadows. Poirot observed the interactions closely. Lady Clara's pointed remarks to Sir Reginald, Carver's barely concealed disdain for Dr. Vance, and Miss Duval's flirtatious glances at anyone who met her eye. Evelyn Shaw, meanwhile, seemed distracted, her fingers twisting a pearl bracelet as the main course was served. Sir Reginald stood, raising a glass. "To the Raven's Rose," he said, "and to new beginnings." The toast was met with murmurs. But Poirot noted the tension in the room. Lady Clara's glass trembled slightly, and Dr. Vance's eyes darted to the door. Something was amiss, though Poirot could not yet name it. Then came the scream. It pierced the air, high and sharp, from somewhere upstairs. The guests froze, glasses clattering to the table. Sir Reginald's face paled. That was from the east. "Wing," he said, already moving. Poirot followed, his short legs surprisingly swift. The group ascended a grand staircase, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall. They reached a locked door at the end of a corridor, its wood carved with the same Ravenandros motif. Sir Reginald fumbled with a key, but before he could unlock it, Graves appeared, his face ashen. "It's Lady Clara's room, sir," he whispered. "She went to fetch her shawl before dinner." The door swung open, revealing a chamber in disarray. A chair was overturned, a mirror cracked, and on the floor lay a silk scarf, stained with what could only be blood. Lady Clara was gone. Poirot stepped forward, his eyes scanning every detail. The windows were sealed, the walls solid. There was no other exit. Yet Lady Clara Beaumont had vanished, as if into thin air. "Monsieur Poirot," Sir Reginald said, his voice hoarse. "What does this mean?" Poirot's moustache twitched, and his eyes gleamed with the spark of a challenge. "It means, sir, Reginald, that Hercule Poirot has a puzzle to solve, and solve it I shall." The next hours were a flurry of activity. The guests were questioned, though none admitted to seeing Lady Clara after she left the dining room. The staff searched the manor, but no trace of her was found. Poirot examined the room meticulously, noting the blood on the scarf fresh, but not enough to suggest a fatal wound. He found a small symbol etched into the floorboard near the window, a circle with a cross inside. Unfamiliar yet deliberate, as the clock struck midnight. Poirot stood alone in the room, the firelight casting his shadow on the wall. The little grey cells were at work, piecing together the fragments of this impossible crime. A locked room, a missing woman, a cryptic symbol, and a house full of secrets. The letter had promised a crime that defied logic, and so it had delivered. But Hercule Poirot thrived on the impossible. He straightened his tie, adjusted his hat, and murmured to himself, "A bean, the game, it has begun." Chapter 2. The Vanishing Guest. The dining hall of Ravenwood Manor gleamed with opulence. Its long mahogany table adorned with silver candelabras that cast flickering shadows across the walls. The air was thick with the scent of roasted pheasant, fine wine, and the undercurrent of tension that always accompanies a gathering of strangers bound by wealth, secrets, and unspoken rivalries. Hercule Poirot sat near the head of the table, his sharp eyes darting from face to face, cataloguing every gesture, every fleeting expression. Sir Reginald Harrow, the host, presided with the confidence of a man accustomed to command, his deep voice booming as he recounted a tale of his latest business triumph. Yet, beneath the polished veneer of the evening, Poirot sensed something amiss, a discord in the harmony of the gathering that he could not yet name. The guests were a curious mix, each a distinct thread in the tapestry of Ravenwood's weekend. To Sir Reginald's right sat Lady Clara Beaumont, a vision in emerald silk, her laughter bright but her eyes guarded, as though she carried a weight no one else could see. Across from her was Dr. Malcolm Vance, a reserved physician with a penchant for adjusting his spectacles when questioned too closely. Beside him lounged Evelyn Carver, a sharp-tongued heiress whose wit was as cutting as her diamond earrings. Then there was Victor Langston, a brash financier with a habit of drumming his fingers on the table, and Margaret Hensley, a quiet widow whose nervous glances suggested she was out of her depth. Finally, at the far end, sat Arthur Crane, Sir Reginald's secretary, a wiry man with a pinched face and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. The meal progressed with the clinking of crystal and the murmur of polite conversation. But Poirot's attention was drawn to Lady Clara. She had been charming, almost theatrical, in her interactions, yet there was a brittleness to her demeanour, as if she were playing a role she no longer believed in. When she excused herself midway through the dessert course, citing a headache, Poirot noted the way her hands trembled as she set down her napkin. Sir Reginald, ever the gracious host, waved off her departure with a jovial remark about the manners, draughty halls, but Poirot's instincts prickled. Something was not right. The guests lingered over their wine, the conversation turning to the manor itself, sprawling Gothic estate, nestled in the remote English countryside, its turrets piercing the fog like the bones of some ancient beast. Sir Reginald, warming to his role as storyteller, began to speak of Ravenwood's history, hinting at its darker chapters, tales of lost heirs, forbidden love, and a rumoured curse tied to an artifact locked away in his private collection. The other guests leaned in, some with amusement, others with unease, but Poirot's mind was elsewhere. He had not heard Lady Clara's footsteps echo in the hall after she left. The manor was old, its floors creaking under the lightest tread. Yet there had been no sound. Perhaps Sir Reginald Poirot interjected, his voice soft but carrying the weight of authority. "You might permit me to check on Lady Clara. A headache, it can sometimes be more than it seems. Nest si pas." Sir Reginald chuckled, his moustache twitching. "Always the gentleman, Monsieur Poirot. Very well, if it eases your mind. Arthur, show him to Lady Clara's room, will you, Arthur?" Crane rose with a nod, his movements precise, almost mechanical. Poirot followed him through the dimly lit corridors, the air growing colder as they ascended the grand staircase. The manor seemed to breathe around them, its walls whispering secrets in the creak of wood and the sigh of distant draughts. They reached Lady Clara's door, a heavy oak panel carved with intricate vines, and Arthur knocked sharply. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. "Lady Clara, are you well?" His voice was clipped, efficient silence. Poirot's moustache twitched slightly, a sign of his growing unease. "Permit me," he said, stepping forward and turning the brass knob. The door was locked. He pressed, his ear to the wood, listening for any sound, a rustle, a breath, a sob. Nothing. He glanced at Arthur, whose expression remained unreadable. "We must open this door," Poirot declared. At once, Arthur hesitated, then produced a ring of keys from his pocket. "Sir Reginald keeps spares for all the guest rooms," he explained, selecting one and fitting it into the lock. The mechanism clicked, and the door swung inward. With a low groan, the room was empty. The bed was untouched, its silk coverlet smooth and pristine. The windows were shut tight, their latches secure, and the heavy drapes hung undisturbed. A fire burned low in the grate, casting a faint glow over the furniture of vanity, a wardrobe, a small writing desk. On the floor, near the centre of the room, lay a silk scarf, its delicate fabric stained with a dark, irregular blotch. Poirot knelt beside it, his gloved fingers hovering over the stain. blood unmistakably. Fresh, but not wet. He straightened, his eyes scanning the room with the precision of a hawk. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "this is most irregular." Arthur's face paled slightly, though his voice remained steady. "She must have left through another door." "There is no other door," Poirot countered, gesturing to the room's single entrance. He crossed to the windows, testing each latch. They were secure, the frames sealed with years of paint. Number. One could have entered or exited that way without leaving a trace. He turned back to the scarf, his mind racing. A locked room, a missing woman, a blood-stained clue. The puzzle was taking shape, and it was one that defied logic. "We must inform Sir Reginald," Poirot said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "and the other guests. This is no longer a matter of a headache." They returned to the dining hall, where the mood had shifted from convivial to restless. Sir Reginald's laughter died as Poirot recounted what they had found, or rather, what they had not found. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their voices rising in a chorus of questions and speculation. "Gone from a locked room." Evelyn Carver's voice was sharp, her eyes narrowing. "That's absurd. People don't just vanish." "Perhaps she wandered off," Victor Langston suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. "The Manor's a maze. Easy to get lost." Margaret Hensley clutched her shawl, her voice trembling. "What about the blood? You said there was blood." Dr. Vance adjusted his spectacles, his expression unreadable. "Blood doesn't mean death. Could be a minor injury. A nosebleed, perhaps." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the chatter. "Mies, Amos's speculation is useless without facts. We must search the manor, every room, every corridor, and we must do so methodically. Monsieur Crane, you know the house better than most. Will you assist?" Arthur nodded, though Poirot noted the slight tightening of his jaw. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I'll organize the staff." The search began at once, the guests splitting into pairs to cover the sprawling estate. Poirot, however, chose to remain in Lady Clara's room, his little grey cells already at work. He examined the scarf again, noting its fine weave, and the monogram embroidered in one corner. CB, the blood was concentrated in the centre, as though it had been deliberately placed there, not spilled in a struggle. He turned his attention to the room itself, pacing its perimeter, tapping the walls, testing the floorboards. Nothing yielded. The room was as sealed as a tomb, yet something caught his eye, faint mark on the floor, near the blood-stained scarf. He crouched, tilting his head to catch the light. It was a symbol, etched lightly into the wood, almost invisible unless viewed at the right angle. A circle, bisected by a vertical line, with a smaller crescent shape at its base. It was not a scratch or a random mark. It was deliberate, precise. Poirot committed it to memory, his mind already cross-referencing it with symbols he had encountered in his travels. Was it occult, Masonic, or something else entirely? He rose, dusting his hands, and turned to the fireplace. The embers glowed faintly, but the hearth was cold to the touch. He ran his fingers along the mantel, then the stones surround, searching for anything out of place. A faint draught brushed. His knuckles, too subtle to be natural in a room so tightly sealed. He pressed harder, and with a soft click, a panel shifted slightly. Not a passage, not yet just a hint of something hidden. He filed it away for later. By the time the search party returned, their faces drawn and their voices hushed, no trace of Lady Clara had been found. The manor staff, led by a dour housekeeper named Mrs. Finch, reported that every room had been checked, Every closet opened. The grounds, too, had been scoured, though the snow outside showed no fresh footprints, beyond those of the searchers. Lady Clara Beaumont had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. Sir Reginald, his earlier joviality replaced by a grim frown, addressed the group in the drawing-room. "This is madness," he said, pacing before the fire. "A guest doesn't just disappear in my home. There must be an explanation." "There is always an explanation," Poirot said calmly, his hands clasped behind his back. "But it requires order, method, and the careful examination of facts. Tell me, Sir Reginald, who is Lady Clara to you, and why was she here?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Sir Reginald hesitated, his eyes flickering. To the other guests, she was an acquaintance, a friend of my late wife's, I believe. She was invited to join us for the weekend, nothing more. Poirot's moustache twitched, nothing more. And yet her disappearance has caused such unease. Perhaps there is more to her presence than you say, Nan. Evelyn Carver laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Oh, come now, Monsieur Poirot. You're suggesting some grand conspiracy. Clara was flighty, probably ran off with some lover we don't know about, without her coat. In this snow." Margaret Hensley's voice was barely a whisper. "And the blood." Dr. Vance cleared his throat. "As I said, it could be nothing. A minor injury. We shouldn't jump to conclusions." Poirot's eyes narrowed, taking in the room. Every guest was on edge, their alibis, unspoken but already forming in their minds. He could sense the lies, the half-truths, the secrets waiting to be uncovered. Lady Clara's disappearance was no accident, no whim. It was a carefully staged act, and the blood, the symbol, the locked room, they were all pieces of a puzzle that Poirot was determined to solve. The night wore on, the manor growing colder, its shadows deeper. The guests retired to their rooms, but sleep was elusive. Poirot remained in the drawing-room, his notebook open, his pencil sketching the strange symbol from Lady Clara's room. He thought of the blood-stained scarf, the sealed windows, the draught by the fireplace, and he thought of the guests each, with their own motives, their own secrets, their own reasons, to wish Lady Clara gone. The game, as he often called it, had begun. And Hercule Poirot was not a man to lose. The next morning, the manor was shrouded in a thick fog that pressed against the windows like a living thing. Breakfast was a sombre affair, the clatter of cutlery the only sound breaking the silence. Poirot observed the guests closely, noting the bags under their eyes, the nervous glances they exchanged. The absence of Lady Clara was a palpable weight, and the mystery of her disappearance hung over them like a storm cloud. Sir Reginald, attempting to restore some semblance of normalcy, suggested a tour of his private collection, a gallery of artifacts amassed from his travels across the globe. "Perhaps it will take our minds off recent events," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Poirot agreed, sensing an opportunity to learn more about the manor and its master. The group followed Sir Reginald to a wing of the house rarely visited, a long corridor lined with locked doors. At its end was a heavy iron gate, which Sir Reginald opened with a key from his pocket. Beyond it lay the collection room, a cavernous space filled with glass cases and shelves, each holding treasures that gleamed in the dim light. Jade statues, ancient coins, ceremonial daggers, and a peculiar obsidian amulet that seemed to draw the eye. "This," Sir Reginald said, gesturing to the amulet, "is said to be tied to the Ravenwood curse. A silly legend, of course, but it makes for a good story." Poirot leaned closer, studying the amulet. It was carved with a symbol strikingly similar to the one in Lady Clara's rumour circle, a line, a crescent. A good story, perhaps. He murmured, but stories have a way of becoming truth in the minds of those who believe them. Margaret Hensley shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. They say it brings misfortune to anyone who crosses its owner. Do you think? Could it have something to do with Clara? Nonsense, Evelyn Carver snapped, though her eyes lingered on the amulet. It's just a trinket. Clara's probably halfway to London by now. Poirot said nothing, but his mind was racing. The symbol, the curse, the blood there was. A connection, however tenuous. He resolved to speak with the staff next, particularly Mrs. Finch, who had seemed reluctant to meet his gaze during the search. Servants, he knew, often saw what guests did not. As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered in the collection room, his fingers brushing the glass case that held the amulet. Sir Reginald had locked the gate behind them, but Poirot's keen ears caught a faint sound, a soft click, like a latch being undone. He turned, expecting to see Arthur Crane or one of the staff, but the corridor was empty. The manor, it seemed, was full of secrets. He found Mrs. Finch in the kitchen, overseeing the preparation of lunch. She was a stern woman, her grey hair pulled tightly back, her hands moving with the efficiency of long practice. When Poirot approached, she stiffened, her eyes darting to the door. "Madame Finch," Poirot began, his voice smooth as velvet. "You have served the Harrow family for many years, I understand. You must know much of Ravenwood's history." She nodded curtly, wiping her hands on her apron. 30 years, sir. Seen a lot, I have. And this curse," Poirot continued, watching her closely. "What did the servants say of it?" Mrs. Finch's lips tightened. "Old tales, sir. The amulet, they say, it's cursed. Brings death to those who betray the family. But it's just talk. No one believes it. No one." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet, Lady Clara is gone, and there is blood. Tell me, madame, did you see her after she left the dining hall last night?" Mrs. Finch hesitated, her hands twisting in her apron. "No, sir. I was in the kitchen, seeing to the dishes. But I heard something. A cry, faint-like, from upstairs. Thought it was the wind at first, but now..." She trailed off, her eyes haunted. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Merci, madame. You have been most helpful." He left for the kitchen, his mind turning over the new information. A cry, a symbol, a curse. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, but it was incomplete. He needed more clues, more truths, more lies to unravel. The day passed in a haze of suspicion and unease. The guests kept to themselves, their conversations stilted, their eyes wary. Poirot spent the afternoon exploring the manor, mapping its layout in his mind. He noted the creaking floorboards, the hidden alcoves, the way the light fell through the stained glass windows. Every detail mattered, for in the smallest things, he knew, lay the key to the truth. That evening, as the guests gathered for dinner, the tension was palpable. The empty chair where Lady Clara had sat the previous night was a silent accusation, a reminder of the mystery that gripped them all. Poirot watched, listened, and waited. He knew the culprit was among them, hiding behind a mask of innocence. And he knew, too, that the game was far from over. As the meal drew to a close, a scream shattered the silence. It came from upstairs, high and piercing, and the guests froze, their faces pale. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, leading the charge up the grand staircase. The scream had come from Dr. Vance's room, and as they reached it, they found the door ajar. Inside, the scene was eerily familiar. The room was empty, the windows locked, the bed untouched. On the floor lay a single object, a pair of spectacles, their lenses cracked, glinting in the firelight. Dr. Malcolm Vance, like Lady Clara before him, had vanished. Poirot stood in the centre of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning every detail. The game had escalated, and the stakes were higher than ever. 2 guests gone, 2 locked rooms, 2 clues left behind. The manor was a stage, and someone was directing a deadly performance. But Hercule Poirot was no mere spectator. He would uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was hidden. The night closed in around Ravenwood Manor, the fog thicker, the shadows darker, and in the silence, Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, piecing together the puzzle of the vanishing guests. Chapter 3. The Puzzle of the Locked Door, the Dining Room of Ravenwood Manor. Its grandeur, now dimmed by the shadow of Lady Clara Beaumont's disappearance, was a tableau of stunned faces and stifled whispers. The long mahogany table, still laden with the remnants of an opulent dinner, gleamed under the chandelier's soft glow, but the air was thick with unease. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the room, his small, precise figure commanding attention despite the chaos that had erupted. Moments before, his moustache twitched slightly, a telltale sign of the little grey cells stirring within. As he surveyed the guests, each one a potential piece in the intricate puzzle before him. Sir Reginald Harrow, the industrialist whose wealth had built this imposing manor, sat at the opposite end of the table, his broad shoulders slumped and his face ashen. His wife, Lady Evelyn Harrow, clutched a glass of sherry, her knuckles white, her eyes darting toward the door through which Lady Clara had last been seen. The other guests, Mr. Charles Wentworth, a financier with a sharp jaw and sharper ambitions, Miss Sylvia Crane, a novelist whose keen observation belied her demure demeanour, Dr. Malcolm Vance, a reserved physician with an air of quiet authority, and Mr. Edmund Blake, Sir Reginald's private secretary, whose nervous fidgeting betrayed his usual composure, sat in uneasy silence, their gazes flickering between Poirot and the empty chair where Lady Clara had been. The facts, as Poirot had gathered them in the immediate aftermath, were as perplexing as they were sparse. Lady Clara, a striking woman in her early 40s, known for her wit and charm, had excused herself from the dinner table shortly after the main course, claiming a need for fresh air. She had entered the small drawing room adjacent to the dining hall, a room with only 1 door and 2 windows, both of which were sealed shut from the inside. The door had been locked from within, as confirmed by the butler, Mr. Grayson, who had attempted to follow her with a tray of coffee. When the door was finally forced open after several minutes of knocking yielded no response, the room was empty, save for a silk scarf, stained with blood, draped across an armchair. Most disturbingly, a strange symbol, a circle bisected by a jagged line, with 3 smaller dots forming a triangle within, had been etched into the wooden floor near the centre of the room. Poirot's first task was to examine the scene, and he did so with the meticulous care of a watchmaker assembling a delicate mechanism. The drawing room was modest in size, its walls lined with dark oak panelling and adorned with a single portrait of Sir Reginald's late father, a stern-looking man whose painted eyes seemed to follow Poirot's every move. The 2 windows, tall and narrow, were secured with iron latches, rusted from disuse, and the glass panes showed no signs of tampering. The door, heavy and oak, had a sturdy lock that required a key from either side. The key itself was found inside the room, resting on a small side table, as if Lady Clara had locked herself in before vanishing into thin air. Poirot knelt beside the symbol on the floor, his gloved fingers tracing its edges without touching. The etching was fresh, the wood fibers raw and splintered, suggesting it had been carved recently, perhaps that very evening. "Curio," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "This symbol, it is not random. It is deliberate, precise. But what does it signify?" He rose, his eyes sweeping the room once more. The scarf, a delicate piece of crimson silk, lay crumpled on the armchair, its bloodstains stark against the pale upholstery. Poirot examined it closely, noting the irregular pattern of the stain smudged, as if applied with a cloth rather than spilled naturally. He sniffed the fabric, detecting a faint metallic temps, but no other odor that might suggest a chemical or forgery. "The blood," he said to himself, "it is real, but its placement, it is theatrical." Sir Reginald, who had followed Poirot into the room along with Mr. Grayson and Mr. Blake, cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, surely this is the work of some intruder, a kidnapper, perhaps, who gained entry through some hidden means." Poirot turned, his green eyes sharp. "An intruder, Sir Reginald, in a room locked from the inside, with windows sealed and no sign of forced entry. Nan, this is not the work of a phantom. This is a puzzle, and puzzles, they have solutions." He stepped toward the windows, inspecting the latches more closely. The iron was indeed rusted, and the dust on the sills was undisturbed, save for a faint smudge near one corner of the left window. Poirot's lips pursed. "Interesting," he said, producing a small magnifying glass from his pocket. The smudge revealed a faint pattern, almost like the edge of a fingerprint, but it was too indistinct to be certain. He made a mental note and moved on. The other guests, now gathered at the doorway, watched with a mix of curiosity and dread. Miss Sylvia Crane, her notebook already in hand, scribbled furiously, her eyes darting between Poirot and the room. "It's like something out of one of my novels," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "A locked room mystery, the perfect stage for a crime." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Mademoiselle, in your novels, do the victims vanish without trace, leaving only a scarf and a symbol? Or do you perhaps know more of this stage than you let on?" Sylvia flushed, her pen pausing. "I only meant it's dramatic, Monsieur Poirot. I've no knowledge of what happened to Lady Clara." "Been," Poirot said, though his tone suggested he would revisit her words later. He turned to Mr. Grayson, the butler, a wiry man in his 50s with a perpetually furrowed brow. "You say, Monsieur Grayson, that you attempted to enter the room with the coffee tray. How long after Madame Beaumont entered did you knock?" Grayson hesitated, his hands clasped tightly. "No more than 5 minutes, sir. I heard no sound from within, no cry or struggle, just silence." "And the key?" Poirot pressed. "It was in the lock when you arrived." "No, sir. The door was locked, but the key was not in the lock. I used the master key to open it after we broke the door down." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the detail. A locked door, a missing key, and then a key found inside the room. The sequence was wrong, disordered, and Poirot detested disorder. He turned his attention to the floor, pacing slowly around the symbol. The etching was shallow but precise, as if carved with a sharp tool, perhaps a knife or chisel. He crouched again, examining the surrounding floorboards for any signs of disturbance or trapdoor. perhaps, or a loose panel. But the wood was solid, the seams tight. He tapped lightly with his cane, listening for a hollow sound, but none came. "Monsieur Poirot," Mr. Blake interjected, his voice unsteady, "do you think this could be connected to the Manors? History, the staff, they talk of strange occurrences, of a curse tied to Sir Reginald's collection." Poirot's head tilted, his eyes narrowing. "A curse, Monsieur Blake. You speak of superstition, but Hercule Poirot deals in facts. Tell me, what is this collection of which you speak?" Sir Reginald answered, his voice gruff. "My father was a collector of rare artifacts, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, some medieval relics. They're kept in the West Wing, under lock and key. I've never put much stock in the stories, but the staff insists the manor is unsettled." "Unsettled," Poirot repeated, his tone dry. "And yet it is not the manor that has vanished, but Lady Clara. Let us focus on the tangible we." He returned to the armchair, lifting the scarf once more. The bloodstains, he noted, were concentrated at one end, as if the scarf had been deliberately dipped or smeared. He folded it carefully and handed it to Mr. Grayson. "This you will keep safe. It is evidence, and evidence does not lie though it may be made to deceive." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, but Poirot's attention was already elsewhere. He approached the fireplace, a grand stone structure that dominated one wall. The hearth was cold, the logs untouched, but something about the mantel caught his eye a faint irregularity in the stonework. He ran his fingers along the edge, feeling for a seam or latch, but found nothing. Still, the fireplace nagged at him, a piece of the puzzle that did not yet fit. As he stepped back, Lady Evelyn spoke, her voice trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, what does it mean? Is she dead?" Poirot turned, his expression softening, but resolute. "Madame, we do not yet know the fate of Lady Clara, but rest assured, Hercule Poirot will find her, alive or otherwise. The truth, it is like a locked door, it may resist, but with the right key it will open." He dismissed the guests, instructing them to remain in the dining room under Mr. Grayson's supervision. Alone in the drawing room, Poirot stood motionless, his eyes closed, his mind a whirl of facts and possibilities. The locked door, the sealed windows, the bloodstained scarf, the symbol, the smudged fingerprint, they were threads in a tapestry, but the pattern remained elusive. He opened his eyes, his gaze settling on the symbol once more. "You," he said softly, as if addressing it directly, "you are the key. But to what lock?" The hours that followed were a blur of methodical investigation. Poirot interviewed each guest briefly, probing for inconsistencies, though none emerged. Mr. Wentworth claimed to have been discussing business with Sir Reginald at the time of the disappearance, a fact Sir Reginald corroborated. Miss Crane said she had been engrossed in a conversation with Dr. Vance about THIC literature, while Mr. Blake insisted he had been clearing plates with the footman. Lady Evelyn, tearful, said she had noticed nothing unusual until the butler's alarm. Poirot returned to the drawing-room repeatedly, pacing its confines, testing every surface, every possibility. He examined the portrait, wondering if it concealed a safe or passage, but it was fixed firmly to the wall. He studied the ceiling, the floor, the walls, searching for any sign of a hidden mechanism, but the room yielded no secrets. The symbol, however, continued to haunt him. He sketched it in his notebook, a perfect replica of the circle, line, and dots, and stared at it as if it might speak. By midnight, the manor was quiet. The guests retired to their rooms under strict instructions not to leave. Poirot sat in the library, a cup of untouched tisane at his side, his notebook open before him. The symbol, he was certain, was no mere decoration. It was a message, a signature, or perhaps a misdirection. He recalled Mr. Blake's mention of the curse and Sir Reginald's collection. Could the symbol be tied to one of the artifacts? An ancient sigil, perhaps, or a cultic emblem? He resolved to inspect the collection at first light. As he rose to retire, a faint noise reached his ears. Soft creak, like a floorboard underfoot. He froze, his senses alert. The sound came from the direction of the drawing room. Moving silently, his cane tucked under his arm, Poirot crept down the corridor. The drawing room door was ajar, a sliver of moonlight spilling onto the floor. He pushed it open, his eyes scanning the darkness. The room was empty, but the scarf was gone in its place. On the armchair was a single white glove, pristine and out of place. Poirot's heart quickened. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, "the game, it continues." He picked up the glove, noting its fine leather and the faint scent of lavender. It was a woman's glove, too small for Lady Clara's hands, which he had observed at dinner. Whose then? Lady Evelyn, Miss Crane, or another player in this increasingly complex drama? Poirot returned to the library, the glove tucked into his pocket. He would not sleep tonight. The puzzle of the locked door had deepened, and with it, the stakes. Lady Clara's fate, and perhaps others, depended on his ability to unravel the truth hidden within Ravenwood Manor's walls. The night stretched on, and Poirot's mind churned. The symbol, the scarf, the glove, the locked door they were. Pieces, but not the whole. He thought of the guests, their alibis, their secrets. Mr. Wentworth's ambition, Miss Crane's curiosity, Dr. Vance's reserve, Mr. Blake's nervousness, Lady Evelyn's fear, Sir Reginald's denials. Denial each was a thread, but which would lead to the truth. He opened his notebook again, sketching the symbol once more, this time adding the glove beside it. "Order and method," he murmured, his mantra in the face of chaos. "The little grey cells, they will find the way." By dawn, Poirot had formed a hypothesis, though it was incomplete. The symbol, he suspected, was a distraction, meant to evoke the Manor's rumoured curse and divert attention from a more mundane explanation. The scarf, with its staged bloodstains, suggested a performance, not a murder. But the glove, fresh, deliberate, placed after the fact, pointed to someone within the Manor, someone still active, still weaving the web. He stood, stretching his stiff limbs, and made his way to the west wing. The collection awaited, and with it, perhaps, the key to the symbol. As he walked, the Manor's shadows seemed to shift, as if the walls themselves were watching. Poirot smiled faintly. "You think to outwit Hercule Poirot," he said to the empty corridor. "Nan, mise, Amos. The truth, it will be found." The west wing was a labyrinth of locked doors and dusty cabinets, each containing relics of a bygone era. Sir Reginald joined him, unlocking the cases with a heavy keyring. "My father's obsession," he said, gesturing to the artifact scarabs. Amulets, fragments of stone, tablets cammed through the Manor's history. He found no record of the symbol. "A dead end, perhaps," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. Poirot returned to the drawing room one final time, the glove burning a hole in his pocket. He stood over the symbol, his mind racing. The solution was close, he could feel it. A trapdoor, a passage, a trick of timing something explained the impossible. he would find it, or his name was not Hercule Poirot. And so the morning light crept through the manor's windows, illuminating the locked door, the empty room, and the enigma that refused to yield. Poirot's work had only begun. Chapter 4. Whispers of a cursed air in Ravenwood Manor seemed to thicken as the night deepened, the chandeliers casting long, wavering shadows across the ornate dining hall. The clinking of silverware had ceased, replaced by an uneasy silence that clung to the guests like damp fog. Lady Clara Beaumont's disappearance had left everyone on edge, their faces pale under the flickering candlelight. Hercule Poirot, seated at the far end of the table, observed the group with his keen, unblinking eyes, his moustache twitching slightly as he absorbed every nuance of their behavior. The grand clock in the corner struck 11, its chimes reverberating through the room, and yet the weight of the mystery pressed heavier than the hour. Sir Reginald Harrow, the host, stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished oak floor. His broad shoulders were tense, his weathered face betraying a flicker of unease beneath his usual air of authority. "This is intolerable," he growled, his voice rough as gravel. "Clara Lady Beaumont cannot simply vanish from a locked room. There must be an explanation, and I demand we find it." Poirot tilted his head, his fingers steepled before him. "Monsieur Harrow, the explanation, it exists, but it hides itself in the shadows of this manor. We must proceed with method, with order, to uncover it." His voice was calm, almost melodic, but carried a weight that silenced the room. The other guests, Lady Eleanor Winthrop, a sharp-tongued dowager with a penchant for gossip, Mr. Charles Rutherford, a sleek financier with a perpetual smirk, Dr. Malcolm Vance, the reserved physician whose eyes darted nervously, and Miss Evelyn Grey, Sir Reginald's quiet, dyed secretary, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The butler, Mr. Grayson, entered the room, his gaunt face ashen. "Sir Reginald," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "the staff. They are speaking of things, unsettling things." "Speak plainly, man," Sir Reginald snapped, his patience fraying. Grayson hesitated, glancing at the guests before. Continuing, "They say the manor is cursed, sir. That Lady Clara's disappearance is tied to the Harrow family curse. They speak of the artifact, the obsidian raven in your collection." A murmur rippled through the guests. Lady Eleanor's fan snapped shut with a click. "A curse," she scoffed, though her voice trembled slightly. "Preposterous. This is the 20th century, not some Gothic novel." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "A curse, you say, Monsieur Grayson? Tell me, what is this tale the staff whispers of?" Grayson swallowed hard, his hands clasped tightly before him. "It's an old story, sir, passed down among the servants. The Harrow family, they say, came into possession of an artefactor, carved obsidian, raven centuries ago, during Sir Reginald's ancestors' travels in the East. It was said to be a relic of great power, but also great misfortune. Those who owned it, well, they met untimely ends. Disappearances, accidents, madness. The staff believe it's locked in Sir Reginald's private study, and that Lady Clara's vanishing is its doing." Sir Reginald's face reddened. "Utter nonsense," he roared, slamming a fist on the table, causing the crystal glasses to tremble. "That raven is nothing more than a trinket, a collector's piece. I won't have my household spooked by superstitious drivel." "Perhaps," Monsieur Poirot interjected smoothly, "but the mind, it is a curious thing. It clings to stories, to explanations, when the rational fails. Tell me, this obsidian raven, where is it kept?" Sir Reginald's jaw tightened. In my study, as Grayson said, locked in a glass case. No one touches it. And yet Poirot mused, his voice soft but piercing. The staff, they believe it holds power. And belief, mise amiss, can be as dangerous as any curse. I would like to see this artifact, if you permit. The room fell silent again, the weight of Poirot's request hanging in the air. Charles Rutherford leaned forward, his smirk fading. You're not seriously entertaining this, are you, Poirot? A curse. It's absurd. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. Absurdity, Monsieur Rutherford, is often the mask of truth. I do not believe in curses, but I believe in the motives they inspire. Shall we, Sir Reginald? Reluctantly, Sir Reginald nodded. Very well, follow me. The group rose, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall as they followed Sir Reginald. Through the manor's winding corridors, the walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced harrows, their eyes seeming to follow the procession. The air grew colder as they approached the study, a heavy oak door at the end of a dimly lit hallway. Sir Reginald produced a key from his pocket, unlocking the door with a creak that seemed to echo the manor's unease. Inside, the study was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather, shelves groaning under the weight of books and curiosities. In the center, on a pedestal beneath a glass dome, sat the obsidian raven. Its polished surface gleamed in the lamplight, its eyes two tiny red gemstones seeming to pulse with an eerie vitality. The guests gathered around, their breaths shallow. Poirot stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he examined the artifact without touching it. Exquisite, he murmured. And yet, it carries a certain presence, does it not, Miss Evelyn? Gray, who had been silent thus far, spoke softly. It's beautiful, but it makes me uneasy, like it's watching us. Nonsense, Sir Reginald barked, though his voice lacked conviction. It's just a relic, nothing more. Poirot turned to Grayson, who lingered near the door. Monsieur Grayson, tell me more of this curse. What do the stories say happens to those who cross its path? Grayson shifted uncomfortably. They say the raven claims those who betray the Harrow family, that it takes them, vanishes them into the night. Lady Clara, she was asking questions about Sir Reginald's collection earlier today. She seemed particularly interested in the raven. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. Did she now? And what did she say? She asked if it was true that the raven was cursed. Grayson replied. She wanted to know its history, where it came from. I told her what I knew, but Sir Reginald stopped her from entering the study. He said it was private. Sir Reginald's face darkened. She had no business poking into my affairs. Clara was always too curious for her own good. Gaze flicked to Sir Reginald, then back to the raven. Curiosity, monsieur, is often the spark that ignites truth. Tell me, was Lady Clara alone when she inquired about the raven? Grayson hesitated. No, sir. Dr. Vance was with her. They were whispering together. I couldn't hear what they said. Dr. Vance stiffened, his pale face growing paler. I was merely indulging her curiosity, he said quickly. She asked about the manor's history, and I humoured her. Nothing more. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Of course, Dr. N. Yet, the little grey cells, they wonder why such interest in a mere trinket. The group stood in uneasy silence, the raven's red eyes seeming to bore into them. Lady Eleanor broke the tension with a sharp laugh. This is ridiculous. We're standing here, staring at a statue, while Clara is missing. We should be searching the grounds, not chasing ghost stories. Madame Poirot said, his tone gentle but firm. "The grounds have been searched. The room where Lady Clara vanished was locked, the windows sealed. The scarf, stained with blood, remains our only clue. And now, this talk of a curse. I do not dismiss it, not because I believe in spirits, but because someone may wish us to believe in them." Charles Rutherford snorted. "You think someone's staging this? Using a fairy tale to cover their tracks?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It is possible, monsieur. The human mind, it loves a story. A curse provides a convenient distraction from the truth. But the truth, it is like the raven, it sits quietly, waiting to be seen." Sir Reginald cleared his throat. "Enough of this. Poirot, what do you propose we do next?" Poirot turned, his small frame commanding the room. "We return to the facts. The locked room, the blood-stained scarf, the symbol on the floor, and now, this talk of a curse. I will speak with each of you, alone, tomorrow morning. For now, I suggest we retire. The night, it has a way of revealing secrets, but only to those who listen." The guests dispersed, their footsteps heavy with unease. Poirot lingered in the study, his eyes fixed on the obsidian raven. He did not believe in curses, but he believed in the power of Firand. Someone in Ravenwood Manor was wielding it with precision. The next morning, the manor was shrouded in a thick mist that clung to the windows like a second skin. Breakfast was a sombre affair, the absence of Lady Clara a palpable weight. Poirot entered the dining hall, his demeanour as polished as ever, but his eyes sharp. With purpose, he had spent the night turning the facts over in his mind, his little grey cells working tirelessly to untangle the mystery. He began his interviews in the library, a vast room lined with books and heavy with the scent of old leather. One by one, the guests and staff were summoned, each offering their version of events, their alibis, their suspicions. But it was the staff who provided the most intriguing insights, their whispers of the curse weaving a thread Poirot could not ignore. Mrs. Agnes, the housekeeper, was the first to elaborate. A stout woman with a nonsense demeanour, she sat stiffly before Poirot, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I've served the Harrows for 30 years, she said, her voice low. "I've seen things in this house, strange things. Doors that creak open on their own, shadows that move when no one's there. The Raven, it's not just a story, Mr. Poirot. It's real." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "And what, madame, do you believe it does?" Mrs. Agnes hesitated, her gaze flickering to the window. "It takes people, those who wronged the family. Sir Reginald's father, he died in this house, you know. Fell down the stairs, they said. But I saw the look in his eyes before he went. He was terrified, like something was after him." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And Lady Clara, did she wrong the family?" Mrs. Annis's lips tightened. "I don't know, sir, but she was asking about the Raven, like Grayson said, and she was secretive, always whispering with that Dr. Vance. I saw them in the garden yesterday, looking at the study window." "Mercy, Madame Agnes," Poirot said, dismissing her. "Your observations, they are most illuminating." Next came Thomas, the young footman, whose nervous fidgeting betrayed his discomfort. "I don't like talking about it, sir," he said, his voice barely audible, "but the Raven, it's got a power. My gran, she worked here when she was young. She said the Raven was stolen from a temple long ago. The Harrows, they paid a price for it. Blood, always blood." Poirot's moustache twitched. "And this blood, you believe it is connected to Lady Clara's scarf. Thomas's eyes widened. "I don't know, sir, but I saw her yesterday in the hall near the study. She was holding that scarf, twisting it in her hands like she was nervous. Then she went into the drawing room, and, well, you know what happened." Poirot dismissed Thomas, his mind racing. The scarf, the symbol, the curse, they were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. He interviewed the remaining staffer maid, who swore she heard whispers in the walls. A cook who claimed the raven's eyes glowed at night, but their stories, while vivid, offered little clarity. The curse, it seemed, was a spectre that haunted Ravenwood Manor, but whether it was real or a fabrication, Poirot could not yet say. The guests were less forthcoming. Lady Eleanor dismissed the curse as servants' gossip, though her trembling hands betrayed her nerves. Charles Rutherford laughed off the idea, but his eyes darted to the door as if expecting something to emerge. Dr. Vance insisted he knew nothing of the raven's history, though his evasive answers suggested otherwise. Miss Evelyn Grey, however, was the most intriguing. She spoke little, her eyes fixed on the floor, but when Poirot pressed her about Lady Clara's interest in the raven, she faltered. She asked me about it, Evelyn admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She said she'd heard stories, that it was valuable. I told her to ask Sir Reginald, but she wouldn't. She said it was personal. Poirot repeated, his tone sharp. "In what way, mademoiselle?" Evelyn's cheeks flushed. "I don't know, Mr. Poirot. She wouldn't say more, but she seemed afraid." Poirot leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly on the arm of his chair. Fear, he thought, was a powerful motivator. But was Lady Clara afraid of the raven, or of someone who used its legend to their advantage? As the day wore on, Poirot returned to the drawing room where Lady Clara had vanished. The blood-stained scarf still lay on the table, carefully preserved for his inspection. The room was as it had been, windows sealed, door locked from the inside, the strange symbol etched into the floor. Poirot knelt beside it, tracing the lines with his finger. It was no random mark. It was deliberate, a spiral with sharp angles, like a rune from some forgotten language. He stood, his eyes scanning the room. The walls were panelled in dark wood, adorned with paintings of pastoral scenes. The fireplace was cold, its grate empty. The furniture, velvet sofa, a mahogany table, a crystal chandelier of furred, no obvious clues. And yet, Poirot's instincts told him the answer lay here, in this room, hidden in plain sight. He turned his attention to the scarf, lifting it carefully with a gloved hand. The blood was dry, a dark crimson that stained the delicate silk. But something caught his ardor, faint scent, barely detectable. He brought the scarf closer, inhaling deeply. It was not blood alone. There was something else, a chemical temps, like paint. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Paint, not blood. Or perhaps blood mixed with paint to create the illusion of violence. The scarf was a clue, but not to a murder, perhaps to a deception. He placed it back on the table, his mind racing. The curse, the symbol, the scar, they were all part of a performance, a carefully staged act to mislead. He left the drawing room and returned to the study, where the obsidian raven sat in its glass case. The red eyes seemed to follow him as he paced, his hands clasped behind his back. "You, my friend," he murmured to the raven, "you are the key, but to what lock?" He examined the case, noting the lock's intricate design. It was secure, but not impenetrable. He tapped the glass lightly, listening to the sound. Solid, but not unbreakable. And then he noticed something, a faint scratch on the pedestal, barely visible. He knelt, peering closer. The scratch formed a tiny arc, as if the case had been moved, just slightly. Poirot's lips curved into a smile. "Ah, mon ami, you have been touched, have you not?" He stood, his mind alight with possibilities. The raven, the curse, the disappearances were connected not by supernatural forces, but by human cunning. Someone in Ravenwood Manor was playing a dangerous game, and Poirot was determined to uncover the truth. The afternoon brought a new development. Poirot was summoned to the library, where Sir Reginald stood with Grayson, their faces grim. "Poirot," Sir Reginald said, his voice tight, "we've found something. In the attic." The attic was a cavernous space, filled with dusty trunks and forgotten relics. A single bulb cast a dim glow, illuminating a small wooden box tucked behind a pile of crates. Grayson opened it, revealing a collection of paper letters, photographs, and a small notebook, all yellowed with age. Poirot leafed through the notebook, his eyes scanning the faded ink. It was a journal, written in a hurried hand, detailing the acquisition of the obsidian raven. The writer, Sir Reginald's grandfather, described it as a gift from a dying man, purchased in a bazaar in Constantinople. But the final entry was chilling. "The raven sees all. It knows my sins. I cannot escape its gaze." Poirot closed the notebook, his expression unreadable. "This Mies Amos is not the work of a curse. It is the work of a guilty conscience. But whose conscience, I wonder?" He turned to the photographs, which showed the Harrow family through the generations. One caught his Aja young woman, strikingly similar to Lady Clara, standing beside a man who bore a strong resemblance to Sir Reginald's father. The back of the photograph was inscribed, "Clara and Edward, 1895. Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Clara, this is most interesting." "Sir Reginald, who is this woman?" Sir Reginald's face paled. "My aunt, Clara Harrow. She died young, a scandal long forgotten." "I don't see what this has to do with anything." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Perhaps nothing, monsieur. Perhaps everything." As evening fell, the manor's atmosphere grew heavier, the mist outside thickening into a fog that obscured the world beyond the windows. The guests gathered in the drawing room, their nerves frayed. Poirot stood before them, his small frame commanding their attention. "Mies Amos," he began, his voice steady. "We are in the presence of a mystery, but not one of curses or spirits. The obsidian raven, it is a symbol, yes, but of human greed, human fear, human betrayal. Lady Clara's disappearance, the blood-stained scarf, the symbol on the floor, these are not the work of the supernatural, but of a mind most cunning." The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Dr. Vance spoke up, his voice trembling. "What are you saying, Poirot? That one of us is responsible?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "I say only this. The truth, it hides in the shadows, but it cannot hide forever. The raven, it watches, but it is we who must see." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Tomorrow we will continue, but tonight I ask you to think of what you know, what you have seen. The little grey cells, they will find the answer." As the guests dispersed, Poirot remained in the drawing room, his eyes fixed on the spot where Lady Clara had vanished. The curse of the obsidian raven was a fiction, he was certain, but the truth behind it was far more dangerous, and he, Hercule Poirot, would uncover it, no matter how cleverly it was concealed. The night passed uneasily, the manor creaking and groaning as if alive with secrets. Poirot did not sleep, his mind too occupied with the puzzle before him. The raven, the scarf, the symbol, the journal, they were pieces, but not yet a whole. He needed one final clue, one thread to tie them together. At dawn, he returned to the study, drawn once more to the obsidian raven. He examined the pedestal again, running his fingers along the scratch. It was not random. It was deliberate, a mark left by someone who had moved the case. He pressed gently, testing the pedestal's base, and felt a slight give. With a soft click, a panel in the pedestal slid open, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded tightly. Poirot unfolded it, his heart quickening. As he read the words scrawled in a hurried hand, "The raven's curse is a lie, but its power is real. Clara knows too much. She must be silenced." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The note was unsigned, but it was the final piece he needed. The curse was a fabrication, a tool to mask a deeper motive. And now he knew where to look. He closed the compartment, replacing the note, and straightened. The game was nearing its end, and Hercule Poirot was ready to play his final move. Chapter 5. The alibis unravel. The dining room of Ravenwood Manor was a study in opulence. Its long mahogany table gleaming under the soft glow of a crystal chandelier. The air, however, was thick with tension, the kind that settles over a group when trust has been fractured. Hercule Poirot sat at one end, his small, precise hands folded neatly before him, his moustache immaculate despite the late hour. His sharp eyes moved from face to face, observing the 8 remaining guests seated around the table. Sir Reginald Harrow, the host, sat at the head, his broad shoulders slumped, his face a mask of weary authority. The disappearance of Lady Clara. Beaumont had cast a pall over the gathering, and the weight of suspicion hung like a storm. Claude Poirot had requested this assembly after his meticulous examination of the locked room where Lady Clara had vanished. The blood-stained scarf, the sealed windows, the strange symbol etched into the floorboards, all of it pointed to a puzzle that defied simple explanation. Yet Poirot, with his unshakable faith in the little grey cells, knew that no mystery was insoluble. The key, he believed, lay in the people now before him, each harbouring secrets behind their polished facades. "Bon," Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding attention. "We are gathered here to discuss the matter of Lady Clara Beaumont's disappearance. It is not merely a question of where she has gone, but why, and by whose hand. Each of you, me, Amos, has a story to tell." And Hercule Poirot, he listens very carefully. The guests shifted uncomfortably. To Poirot's left sat Mrs. Evelyn Harrow, Sir Reginald's wife, her delicate features pinched with worry. Her fingers toyed nervously with a pearl necklace, a gift from her husband, she had mentioned earlier, though her eyes rarely met his. Next to her was Mr. Victor Langley, a financier with a hawkish face and a reputation for ruthless business dealings. His hands were steady, but his jaw twitched when Lady Clara's name was mentioned. Across from him was Miss Beatrice Lyle, a young novelist whose sharp wit and observant gaze had already caught Poirot's attention. She clutched a small notebook, as if ready to jot down every word spoken. Then there was Captain Hugh Ramsay, a retired military man with a weathered face and a tendency to speak in clipped, authoritative tones. Beside him sat Mrs. Margaret Dunford, a widow with a penchant for gossip and a keen interest in Sir Reginald's artifact collection. Dr. Malcolm Vance, the Manor's resident skeptic and a physician of some repute, leaned back in his chair, his expression one of detached curiosity. Miss Eleanor Gray, a quiet, mousy woman who served as Sir Reginald's secretary, kept her eyes fixed on her hands, her knuckles white. Finally, there was Mr. Charles Pembroke, a journalist with a knack for asking uncomfortable questions, his pen poised over a notepad. Poirot's gaze lingered on each, noting their postures, their glances, the subtle tells that betrayed their thoughts. "Let us begin," he said, "with the events of last night. Lady Clara was last seen at dinner, seated at this very table. She excused herself at approximately 9:30, claiming a headache. She was seen entering her room, and the door was locked from the inside. Yet, when the door was broken down this morning, she was gone. A scarf, stained with blood, was all that remained. I ask you now, where were you between 9:30 and midnight?" A murmur rippled through the group. Sir Reginald cleared his throat. "I was in my study, reviewing some documents. Evelyn was with me for a time, weren't you, dear?" Mrs. Harrow nodded quickly. "Yes, I joined Reginald after dinner. We discussed household matters." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "And how long, Madame Harrow, did you remain in the study?" "Until about 10, I believe," she replied, her voice faltering. "Then I retired to my room, alone." Poirot asked, his tone gentle but probing. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her necklace. "Yes, alone." Poirot made a mental note of her hesitation and turned to Mr. Langley. "And you, Monsieur Langley, a man of business, always occupied, Nan?" Langley's lips curled into a thin smile. "I was in the billiard room with Captain Ramsay. We played a few rounds, then had a drink. I'd say we were there until nearly 11. Captain Ramsay nodded curtly. "That's right. Langley's a poor shot with a cue, but he's good company. We were together the whole time." Poirot's moustache twitched. "The whole time, Captain. No one stepped away, even for a moment." Ramsay's eyes flicked to Langley, then back to Poirot. "Not that I recall." Poirot turned to Miss Lyle, who had been watching the exchange with keen interest. "Mademoiselle Lyle, you are a writer, a student of human nature. Where were you when Lady Clara vanished?" Beatrice Lyle set her notebook down, her expression composed. "I was in the library, working on some notes for my next novel. The manor's atmosphere is inspiring, to say the least. I was there from after dinner until well past midnight." "Alone?" Poirot asked. She met his gaze steadily. "Yes, alone. Though I heard footsteps in the hall at one point around 10, I think. I assumed it was one of the staff." Poirot nodded, filing away her observation. He turned to Mrs. Dunford, whose eyes gleamed with eagerness to speak. "Madame Dunford, you have a reputation for knowing the affairs of others. What did you see or hear last night?" Mrs. Dunford leaned forward, her voice low and conspiratorial. "I was in the drawing room, having a nightcap. I saw Lady Clara leave the dining room. She looked upset, you know, not just ill. I stayed in the drawing room until about 10:30, then went to my room. But I did hear raised voices later, from the direction of the east wing. Couldn't make out the words, though." "Voices," Poirot repeated, his tone thoughtful. "Male or female?" Mrs. Dunford frowned. "Hard to say. They were muffled, but definitely angry." Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Vance, whose detached demeanor had not wavered. "Doctor, you are a man of science. Where were you when this drama unfolded?" Vance shrugged. "In my room, reading a medical journal. I turned in early around 9:15, I'd say. Didn't see or hear anything unusual." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Nothing at all, Doctor, not even the voices Madame Dunford heard. Vance's lips twitched. I'm a heavy reader, Monsieur Poirot. The world could end, and I'd miss it if I'm deep in a journal. A faint chuckle escaped Charles Pembroke, the journalist, drawing Poirot's attention. And you, Monsieur Pembroke, a man who seeks the truth for his readers. Where were you? Pembroke grinned, leaning back in his chair. I was wandering the halls, looking for a story. This manor's got history, you know, curses, scandals, the lot. I was near the East Wing, around 10, poking around. Didn't see Lady Clara, but I did notice Miss Grey coming out of Sir Reginald's study. Miss Grey's head snapped up, her face paling. I was delivering some papers to Sir Reginald. That's all. Poirot tilted his head. At 10 o'clock at night, Mademoiselle Grey, most diligent of you. Her hands twisted in her lap. It's not unusual. Sir Reginald often works late. Sir Reginald nodded. She's right. Eleanor often helps me with correspondence after hours. Poirot's expression remained unreadable. Mercy, Mademoiselle Grey, and you, Monsieur Pembroke, saw nothing else. Pembroke shook his head. Just a lot of shadows and creaky floors. This place could star in a Gothic novel. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. So, we have alibis, some corroborated, some not. Yet Lady Clara is gone, and a scarf stained with blood suggests foul play. Let us now consider motive. Lady Clara, she was not a stranger to any of you, was she? The room grew still. Poirot's question hung in the air, unanswered but heavy with implication. He continued, his voice soft but piercing. Lady Clara Beaumont was a woman of secrets, a woman whose past, perhaps, has caught up with her. Monsieur Langley, you knew her in London, did you not? Langley's jaw tightened. We crossed paths in business circles. She was ambitious, not always scrupulous. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Ambitious enough to cross you, perhaps, to threaten your interests. Langley's eyes flashed. If you're implying I had something to do with her disappearance, you're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. Poirot turned to Mrs. Harrow. And you, Madame Harrow. Lady Clara was a friend of your husband's. Did this friendship ever cause you discomfort? Mrs. Harrow's cheeks flushed. Reginald and Clara were old acquaintances. Nothing more, sir. Reginald's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. Evelyn, there's no need to. No need to what? Poirot interjected smoothly. To speak the truth. Madame Harrow, your discomfort is evident. Was Lady Clara's presence here unwelcome? Mrs. Harrow's lips trembled. She was difficult, always prying, always charming, Reginald. But I didn't harm her. Poirot's gaze moved to Miss Lyell. Mademoiselle Lyell, you wrote a character in your last novella. Femme fatale, none. Some say it was inspired by Lady Clara. True. Beatrice Lyell's eyes narrowed. A writer draws from life, Monsieur Poirot, but my characters are fiction, not confessions. Poirot nodded, undeterred. And you, Capitaine Ramsay, you served in India, as did Lady Clara's late husband. Did you know her then? Ramsay's face hardened. I knew of her. She had a reputation. Let's leave it at that. A reputation, Poirot mused. One that followed her here, perhaps. One that made her a target. The questions continued. Each one a scalpel cutting through the guest's defences. Mrs. Dunford admitted to overhearing. Lady Clara arguing with someone about money weeks before the gathering. Dr. Vance revealed that Lady Clara had once consulted him about a mysterious ailment, though he dismissed it as nerves. Miss Grey, under Poirot's relentless probing, admitted to overhearing Lady Clara and Sir Reginald discussing a sensitive matter the day before the disappearance. Pembroke, ever the opportunist, hinted at a story he was chasing about Lady Clara's involvement in a financial scandal tied to Sir Reginald's company. As the interrogations stretched on, the guests grew restless, their alibis fraying at the edges. Poirot noted every inconsistency, every glance exchanged, every nervous gesture. The clock on the mantel struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the tense silence. "Mes amis," Poirot said at last, rising from his chair, "you have given me much to consider. But know this, Hercule Poirot does not believe in ghosts or curses. Lady Clara's disappearance is the work of a human hand, and that hand is in this room. I will find it." He paused, letting his words settle. "Tomorrow we will reconvene. I suggest you all reflect on your stories. The truth, it has a way of revealing itself." As the guests dispersed, Poirot remained by the table, his eyes fixed on the chandelier's flickering light. The alibis were airtight, yet riddled with holes. The motives were plentiful, yet none felt complete. The puzzle was far from solved. But Poirot's little grey cells were at work, weaving together the threads of deception. The next morning, Poirot stood in the Manor's library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy oak furniture. The air smelled of old paper and wax polish, and a fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows on the walls. Poirot had chosen this room for his next round of inquiries. Believing its quiet isolation would unsettle the guests further, he began with Sir Reginald, who arrived looking haggard, his usual commanding presence diminished. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, sinking into an armchair, "this business with Claret's madness. I can't believe anyone here would harm her." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet, someone has. Tell me, Sir Reginald, what was the nature of your relationship with Lady Clara?" Sir Reginald's eyes flickered. "We were friends, nothing more. She invested in my company years ago. A shrewd woman, but complicated. Complicated how?" Poirot pressed Sir Reginald's side. "She had a knack for getting what she wanted. People trusted her, then regretted it. I invited her here to discuss a business matter, nothing sinister." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And this business mattered it. It involved the artifact. In your collection, the one the staff whisper about." Sir Reginald's face darkened. "Superstition, Poirot. That artifact is a trinket, nothing more. Clara was curious about it, but I told her it was nonsense." Poirot made a mental note and dismissed Sir Reginald, calling in Mrs. Harrow next. She entered with a brittle smile, her hands clasped tightly. "Monsieur Poirot, I hope you're making progress. This ordeal is unbearable." Madame Poirot said, "I progress by understanding the heart. You were jealous of Lady Clara, were you not?" Mrs. Harrow's smile vanished. "Jealous? That's absurd. Reginald and I are devoted to each other. Yet you spoke of her prying, her charm," Poirot said softly. "Did you fear she sought to undermine your marriage?" Mrs. Harrow's eyes filled with tears. "She was always there, always whispering in his ear. I didn't trust her, but I didn't hurt her." Poirot watched her closely, noting the tremble in her voice. He dismissed her and continued with the others, each interview revealing new facets of Lady Clara's life. Victor Langley admitted to a failed business deal with her, one that cost him dearly. Captain Ramsay confessed to a grudge from their time in India when Lady Clara's husband had humiliated him. Beatrice Lyle revealed that Lady Clara had threatened to sue her over the novel's character, Mrs. Dunford. Ever eager to gossip, hinted at a rumoured affair between Lady Clara and a prominent figure, possibly Sir Reginald. Dr. Vance remained aloof, but Poirot sensed he was hiding something. Miss Grey, nervous and evasive, admitted to handling sensitive documents that might have implicated Lady Clara in fraud. Pembroke, meanwhile, seemed almost too eager to share his theories, as if deflecting attention from himself by midday. Poirot's notebook was filled with details, yet the picture remained incomplete. He paced the library, his mind racing. The alibis were too perfect, too rehearsed. Someone was lying, but who? And how had Lady Clara vanished from a locked room? That afternoon, Poirot took a walk through the manor's grounds, the cold air sharpening his thoughts. The snow-covered lawn stretched toward the forest, and he noticed footprints faint, but fresh, leading from the manor's east wing to the edge of the trees, where they abruptly stopped. He crouched, examining them closely. They were small, possibly a woman's, but the pattern was odd, as if the walker had deliberately obscured their tracks. Returning to the manor, Poirot sought out the housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, a stern woman who had served the Harrow family for decades. She stood in the kitchen, supervising the staff, her expression guarded. "Madame Finch," Poirot said, "you have heard the whispers of a curse. Tell me of this artifact in Sir Reginald's collection." Mrs. Finch's lips pursed. "It's an old thing, sir. A carved stone from some foreign land. They say it's cursed, that it brings misfortune to those who meddle with it." Lady Clara was asking about it, poking around where she shouldn't. "And you believe this curse caused her disappearance?" Poirot asked, his tone neutral. Mrs. Finch hesitated. "I don't know what to believe, sir, but strange things happen in this house. Always have." Poirot thanked her and returned to the library, his mind turning to the artifact. Was it a red herring, or did it hold a clue? He needed more information, but the guests were growing cagey, their stories shifting like sand. That evening, Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing room, a smaller, more intimate space than the dining room. The fire roared, but the atmosphere was icy. He stood before them, his posture erect, his eyes piercing. "Miss Amos," he began, "the alibis you have provided. They are like a tapestry, beautiful, but with threads that do not align. Let us revisit the night of Lady Clara's disappearance. Monsieur Langley, you and Capitaine Ramsay were in the billiard room. Yet the billiard room is near the east wing, where Madame Dunford heard voices. Did you hear nothing?" Langley's jaw tightened. "It's a big house, Poirot. Sound doesn't carry that far." "And you, Capitaine Ramsay?" Poirot pressed. "You are?" "A military man, trained to notice details. Nothing unusual." Ramsay shifted. "Maybe I heard a door slam. Didn't think much of it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A door, you say? Interesting. And you, Mademoiselle Lyle, in the library did you hear this door?" Beatrice Lyle frowned. "I told you, I heard footsteps. Maybe a door, too, now that I think of it." Poirot turned to Mrs. Dunford, and the voices. "Madame, can you recall anything more?" Mrs. Dunford leaned forward, eager to contribute. They were low, angry. One was a woman's, I'm sure. The other, maybe a man. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. He turned to Miss Grey. "Mademoiselle Grey, you were in Sir Reginald's study at 10. Yet Sir Reginald says you left shortly after. Where did you go?" Miss Grey's hands trembled. "To my room. I was tired." "Yet Monsieur Pembroke saw you leaving the study," Poirot said. "And the east wing?" It is not on the way to your room." Miss Grey's face flushed. I had took a wrong turn. This house is a maze. Poirot's mustache twitched. A maze, indeed. And you, Monsieur Pembroke, wandering the halls, chasing stories. Did you see anyone else? Pembroke grinned. Just shadows, Poirot, and Miss Grey, like I said. Poirot paced before the fire, his hands clasped behind his back. The shadows, they are many in Ravenwood Manor. But Hercule Poirot, he sees through them. You have all told me where you were, but not why Lady Clara was a threat. Her past, it is a web that ensnares you all. Monsieur Langley, her business dealings. Cost you a fortune, Capitaine Ramsay. Her husband shamed you. Mademoiselle Lisle, she threatened your reputation. Madame Dunford, you feared her secrets would ruin your social standing. Dr. Vance, you know more about her health than you admit. Mademoiselle Grey, you handled documents that could destroy her. Monsieur Pembroke, you sought a scandal to sell. Papers, and Sir Reginald, Madame Herroyou, both had reasons to wish her gone. The room was silent, the guests frozen under Poirot's gaze. He continued, his voice low and deliberate. One of you knows where Lady Clara is. One of you has woven a lie so clever it almost fooled Hercule Poirot, but not quite. He paused, letting the tension build. Tomorrow I will inspect the East Wing. There, I believe, lies the key to this mystery. I suggest you all sleep lightly tonight. As the guests dispersed, their faces pale and drawn, Poirot remained by the fire, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The alibis were unraveling, but the truth was still hidden. The symbol, the scarf, the voices, the footprints, they were pieces of a puzzle that only his little grey cells could solve. The next day, Poirot began his investigation of the East Wing, a dimly lit corridor lined with portraits of the Harrow family. The air was colder here, the silence heavier. He examined each door, each window, searching for anything out of place. At the end of the hall, he found a small, locked door, barely noticeable behind a tapestry. With the help of Mrs. Finch, he obtained the key and opened it, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Poirot descended carefully, his flashlight casting eerie shadows. The staircase led to a small, dusty room filled with old furniture and crates. Among them, he found a box containing papers, letters, contracts, and a photograph of Lady Clara with a young man, their faces serious. The documents hinted at a financial scheme involving Sir Reginald's company, with Lady Clara at its centre. Poirot's heart quickened. This was no coincidence. The East Wing, the voices, the locked door, it all pointed to a conspiracy. But who was at its heart? Returning to the main house, Poirot summoned Miss Grey, whose nervousness had only grown. "Mademoiselle," he said, holding up the photograph, "this is you with Lady Clara, is it not?" Miss Grey's eyes widened. "That's from years ago. We were friends before I came to work for Sir Reginald." "And these documents?" Poirot asked, his voice firm. "They suggest Lady Clara was blackmailing Sir Reginald. Did you know?" Miss Grey's hands shook. I suspected. She asked me to keep certain papers hidden. I didn't know what they were." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, you said nothing. Why?" "I was scared," she whispered. "She said she'd ruin me if I spoke." Poirot nodded, dismissing her. The pieces were falling into place, but the final picture eluded him. He needed one more clue, one more slip. That evening, Poirot gathered the guests once more, this time in the East Wing. He stood before the locked door, his expression grave. "Mies Amos," he said, "the truth is near. This door, it hides a secret, and one of you knows what it is." He unlocked the door, revealing the staircase. The guests gasped, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. Poirot led them down, his flashlight illuminating the dusty room. He pointed to the box of papers. "Here lies the motive for Lady Clara's disappearance. She was a threat to someone in this house, a threat that could no longer be ignored." He turned to Sir Reginald. "Monsieur, these papers implicate you in a scandal. Did Lady Clara threaten to expose you?" Sir Reginald's face reddened. "She was trying to extort me, yes, but I didn't harm her." Poirot's gaze shifted to Miss Grey. "And you, mademoiselle, you knew of her plans. Did you help her, or did you betray her?" Miss Grey's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't do anything, I swear." Poirot stepped closer, his voice low. "Then, why, mademoiselle, do your footprints match those outside, leading nowhere?" The room froze. Miss Grey's face crumpled, and she sank to her knees. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted her to stop." Poirot's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "You will tell Hercule Poirot everything, mademoiselle, now." As Miss Grey began to speak, the truth unravelled, a tale of betrayal, fear, and a desperate act to protect a secret. The alibis had been a facade, but Poirot's little grey cells had seen through them. The mystery of Lady Clara's disappearance was not yet fully solved, but the net was closing, and the truth was within reach. The chapter continues with Poirot's relentless pursuit of the truth, his interrogations growing sharper, his observations keener. The guests' alibis crumble further as he uncovers more connections between them and Lady Clara's past. The manor's secrets, from the artifact to the hidden papers, weave a complex web. But Poirot's logic cuts through it, step by step, until the final revelation looms just out of sight. Chapter 6. A second disappearance. The air in Ravenwood Manor was thick with unease, a palpable tension that clung to the walls like damp moss. The disappearance of Lady Clara Beaumont the previous evening had left the guests in a state of disquiet, their polite facades cracking under the weight of suspicion and fear. The dining room, once aglow with the warmth of crystal chandeliers and the clink of fine china, now felt like a stage where every glance was a line in an unwritten script of distrust. Hercule Poirot, seated at the head of the long mahogany table, sipped his tisane, his sharp eyes darting from face to face, cataloguing every nervous tic, every forced smile. Sir Reginald Harrow, the host, sat opposite Poirot, his broad shoulders slumped as if bearing an invisible burden. His usually commanding presence was diminished, his face pale under the candlelight. Around the table were the remaining guests: Miss Evelyn Carver, a sharp-tongued novelist whose pen was as cutting as her wit; Mr. Charles Langley, a financier, with a penchant for risky investments and an even riskier charm; Mrs. Beatrice Langley, his wife, whose demure exterior masked a steely resolve; and Dr. Malcolm Vance, a reserved physician whose quiet demeanour seemed to hide more than it revealed. The absence of Lady Clara was a spectre at the table, her empty chair a silent accusation. The meal was a subdued affair, the clatter of cutlery punctuated by strained small talk. Poirot, ever observant, noted how Miss Carver's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her wineglass, how Mr. Langley's eyes flicked toward the door every few minutes, as if expecting an uninvited guest. Mrs. Langley, meanwhile, maintained a composed air, but her tight grip on her fork betrayed her nerves. Dr. Vance seated to Poirot's left, ate mechanically, his gaze fixed on his plate, though his thoughts seemed elsewhere. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured to himself, his moustache twitching as he leaned back in his chair. The human heart, it is a labyrinth, is it not? And here, in this manner, the paths are tangled indeed. The conversation turned to the events of the previous night. Sir Reginald, clearing his throat, attempted to steer the discussion toward practical matters. "We must assume," he said, his voice hoarse, "that Lady Clara's disappearance is a misunderstanding. Perhaps she wandered off, got lost in the manor's many corridors." Miss Carver let out a sharp laugh, her eyes glinting with skepticism. "Wandered off in a locked room, Sir Reginald, with sealed windows and a blood-stained scarf left behind. You'll forgive me if I find that explanation lacking." Poirot raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. "Mademoiselle Carver, your observation is most astute. The circumstances, they are indeed peculiar. But let us not leap to conclusions. The facts, they must guide us, not our fears." Mr. Langley leaned forward, his voice low. "And what are the facts, Monsieur Poirot?" "A woman vanishes from a room with no exits, leaving behind a scarf stained with blood. The staff whisper of curses, and we're all sitting here pretending it's a parlor game. What do you make of it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with the challenge. "The facts, Monsieur Langley, are like the pieces of a puzzle. They may appear disparate, but when arranged by the little grey cells, they form a picture. The blood, the scarf, the locked door, these are not mysteries in themselves, but threads in a tapestry. We must find the pattern before anyone could respond." A piercing scream shattered the fragile calm. It came from the direction of the west wing, where the guest rooms were located. The guests froze, their faces a gallery of shock and dread. Poirot was the first to move, his small frame rising with surprising agility as he strode toward the sound, his polished shoes clicking on the polished floor. The others followed, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous halls of Ravenwood Manor. The scream had come from Dr. Vance's room, and as they reached the door, they found it ajar. Mrs. Langley, her face pale, pushed past Poirot and entered, only to stop short with a gasp. The room was in disarray. A chair lay overturned, its carved legs pointing skyward like the limbs of a fallen beast. The window was shut tight, the heavy drapes undisturbed. On the floor, near the bed, lay a single object, a silver pocket watch, its face cracked, the hands frozen at 11:47. Dr. Malcolm Vance was nowhere to be seen. Poirot knelt beside the watch, his gloved fingers hovering over it as if it might whisper its secrets. "Curio," he muttered. "Another disappearance, and yet the room, it is sealed as before. The watch, it is a clue, n'est-ce pas? But to what?" Sir Reginald, standing in the doorway, ran a hand through his thinning hair. "This is madness," he said, his voice trembling. "First Clara, now Malcolm. What is happening in my house?" Miss Carver, her arms crossed, surveyed the room with a writer's eye for detail. "It's like one of my novels," she said, her tone more intrigued than frightened. "A locked room, a missing person, a cryptic clue. But this isn't fiction, is it, Monsieur Poirot?" "No, Mademoiselle," Poirot replied, rising to his feet. "This is reality, and reality, it is far more complex than any novel. But fear not, Hercule Poirot does not shy away from complexity." He began his examination of the room, moving with the precision of a watchmaker. The bed was neatly made, the pillows undisturbed. The wardrobe contained Dr. Vance's clothes, neatly hung, with no sign of a struggle. The fireplace was cold, its grate empty. Poirot paused at the window, testing the latch. It was locked from the inside, the key still in place. He tapped the glass, his brow furrowing. "No forced entry," he said aloud, as if addressing the room itself. No signs of violence, save for the overturned chair. And yet, the good doctor, he is gone, and this watch, it tells us something, does it not? Mrs. Langley, who had been silent until now, spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. Could it be the curse? The staff, they've been talking about it. The artifact in Sir Reginald's collection, the one tied to the Harrow family. They say it brings misfortune. Poirot turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Madame, I have heard of this curse, yes, but Hercule Poirot, he does not believe in curses. He believes in facts, in logic, in the workings of the human mind. If there is a curse in this manner, it is one woven by human hands, not by spirits." Mr. Langley scoffed, his earlier charm replaced by agitation. Logic. What logic explains? Two people vanishing into thin air. If it's not a curse, then what? A ghost, a madman. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A madman, perhaps, but not in the sense you mean, monsieur. A mind that plans, that calculates, that manipulates. This is the force we face, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall uncover it. The group spent the next hour searching the room, but no further clues emerged. The pocket watch was identified as Dr. Vance's, a gift from his late father, according to Mrs. Langley, who had seen him fidget with it during dinner. The cracked face suggested it had been dropped, but there were no signs of a struggle beyond the overturned chair. The room, like Lady Clara's, was a locked enigma as the guests retreated to the drawing-room. Their nerves frayed, Poirot lingered in the hallway, his mind racing. 2 disappearances, 2 locked rooms, 2 cryptic clues. The blood-stained scarf in Lady Clara's room, the broken watch in Dr. Vance's, and the whispers of a curse, tying both to Sir Reginald's mysterious artifact. Poirot's little grey cells were at work, turning over each detail like a jeweller examining a gem. He rejoined the others in the drawing-room, where the atmosphere was suffocating. Sir Reginald had poured himself a brandy, his hands shaking as he raised the glass to his lips. Miss Carver sat by the fire, scribbling in a notebook, her eyes darting to the others as if gathering material for her next novel. Mr. and Mrs. Langley sat close together, their whispers barely audible. The absence of Dr. Vance and Lady Clara loomed over them all. "Monsieur Poirot," Sir Reginald said, setting down his glass, "what do we do now? The police, a search party." Poirot shook his head. "The police, they will come in time, but for now we must rely on our own resources. A search party, perhaps, but first I must speak with the staff. They know this manor better than we do, and their whispers of curses may hold truths, even if not the ones they believe." He summoned the butler, Mr. Grayson, a stooped man with a face lined by years of service. Grayson confirmed that the staff had been abuzz with talk of the Harrow family curse, tied to an artifact Sir Reginald had acquired years ago, a small obsidian statue said to be of ancient origin. They say it brings death to those who cross. Its owner, Grayson said, his voice low. "But it's just talk, sir." "Superstition," Poirot nodded, dismissing the butler but filing away the information. Superstition or not, the curse was a thread in the tapestry, and he would follow it. The night wore on, the guests retiring to their rooms under Poirot's strict instructions to lock their doors and stay vigilant. He himself remained in the drawing. room, pacing before the fire, his mind a whirlwind of connections. The scarf, the watch, the locked rooms, the curse, the artifact, and now a second disappearance, as inexplicable as the first. The manor itself seemed to mock him, its shadows hiding secrets just out of reach. The next morning, Poirot gathered the guests in the library, determined to press forward. "Mies Amos," he began, his voice calm but commanding, "we are faced with a puzzle most intricate. But Hercule Poirot, he does not falter before puzzles. Each of you have a piece of this mystery, whether you know it or not. I ask you now to be truthful, to reveal what you may have withheld." Miss Carver raised an eyebrow. "Are you accusing us, Monsieur Poirot? We're victims here, trapped in this wretched manner." "Not victims," Mademoiselle Poirot corrected. "Players in a game, one designed by a mind most cunning, and I intend to win." He began questioning them, probing their movements on the night of Dr. Vance's disappearance. Mr. Langley claimed to have been in his room, reading. Mrs. Langley said she had been with her husband, though her hesitation suggested otherwise. Miss Carver admitted to wandering the halls, seeking inspiration for her writing, but swore she saw nothing unusual. Sir Reginald, visibly shaken, said he had been in his study. Reviewing papers, Poirot listened, his eyes never leaving their faces. Lies, he knew, were like cracks in a mirror small, but visible to the trained eye. And there were cracks here, in the glances they exchanged, in the pauses before their answers. As the day progressed, Poirot continued his investigation, moving through the manor with methodical precision. He examined the west wing, noting the layout of the corridors, the placement of the windows, the thickness of the walls. He returned to Dr. Vance's room, studying the overturned chair, the broken watch. Something nagged at him, a detail just out of reach, like a word on the tip of the tongue. By evening, the tension in the manor was unbearable. The guests avoided each other, their conversations reduced to curt exchanges. Poirot, undeterred, requested a private audience with Sir Reginald in his study. The industrialist, his face haggard, agreed. "Monsieur Harrow," Poirot began, seating himself across from the desk, "this artifact of which the staff speak, I must see it." Sir Reginald hesitated, then nodded. He opened a locked drawer and withdrew a small, black statue, its surface polished to a mirror-like sheen. It depicted a figure, neither human nor animal, its features indistinct yet unsettling. "It's from an excavation in Mesopotamia," Sir Reginald said. "I acquired it years ago. The locals claimed it was cursed, but I thought it mere superstition." Poirot examined the statue, his fingers tracing its smooth surface. "And yet, 2 guests have vanished, and the whispers of this curse grow louder. Tell me, monsieur, who else knows of this artifact?" "Only my closest confidants," Sir Reginald replied. "My secretary, Mr. Whitmore, and a few trusted staff. Clara Lady Beaumont knew of it. She was fascinated by antiquities." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And Dr. Vance, did he know?" Sir Reginald frowned. "I don't believe so. He never mentioned it." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The artifact was a piece of the puzzle, but its place in the pattern was unclear. He thanked Sir Reginald and returned to the library, where he sat in silence, his little grey cells working overtime. That night, as the manor slept, Poirot remained awake, his candle casting flickering shadows on the walls. He thought of the scarf, the watch, the locked rooms, the curse. He thought of the guests, their motives, their secrets. And he thought of the manor itself, its ancient stones hiding truths older than the crimes they now concealed. The next morning brought no answers, only more questions. A search of the grounds revealed nothing, no footprints, no signs of struggle. The guests, now on the verge of panic, demanded action. Poirot, calm as ever, assured them he was close to a solution, though inwardly he wrestled with the complexity of the case. He returned to Dr. Vance's room, drawn once more to the broken watch. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. The hands, frozen at 11:47, seemed to mock him. Why that time? Why that moment? He closed his eyes, letting his mind wander through the facts, the clues, the possibilities, and then, like a spark, in the dark, it came to him. The watch, the scarf, the locked rooms, they were not separate mysteries, but parts of a single, intricate plan. A plan designed not to kill, but to deceive. A plan that relied on misdirection, on the illusion of the impossible. Poirot smiled, his moustache curling upward. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, "it is clever, oh, so clever. But Hercule Poirot, he is cleverer still." He rose, his steps purposeful as he made his way to the drawing room where the guests awaited. The stage was set, the players in place. The second disappearance had deepened the mystery, but it had also brought Poirot closer to the truth. The little grey cells had begun to unravel the tapestry, and soon the pattern would be clear. But for now, the manor held its secrets close, and the shadow of fear grew longer with each passing hour. Chapter 7. The clue in the library, the air in Ravenwood Manor, had grown thick with suspicion, the kind of tension that clung to the walls like damp moss. The disappearance of Lady Clara Beaumont had left the guests restless, their polite facades crumbling under the weight of fear and distrust. Now, with the storm outside raging on, isolating the manor further, Hercule Poirot moved with quiet purpose through the dimly lit corridors. His polished shoes clicked softly on the oak floors, a metronome to his racing thoughts. The little grey cells, as he called them, were already at work, sifting through the fragments of this perplexing puzzle. The dining room, where the guests had last seen Lady Clara, offered no new insights. The blood-stained scarf, the locked door, the strange symbol etched into the floorboards, each clue seemed to taunt him, daring him to unravel their meaning. But Poirot was not a man to be daunted. He had solved cases that baffled Scotland Yard, unmasked killers who believed themselves untouchable. This, he told himself, was merely a matter of order and method. As the guests retired to their rooms, whispering and casting wary glances, Poirot made his way to the manor's library. It was a cavernous room, its walls lined with towering bookshelves that stretched toward a vaulted ceiling. The scent of old leather and aged paper filled the air, mingling with the faint tang of wood smoke from the fireplace. A single chandelier cast a golden glow, illuminating rows of books that seemed to hold secrets of their own. Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. Libraries, he knew, were not just repositories of knowledge, but of truths hidden in plain sight. He began his search methodically, running his gloved fingers along the spines of books, noting their titles. Most were predictable, volumes on history, philosophy, and the classics. Alongside Sir Reginald Harrow's collection of obscure texts on archaeology and ancient artifacts. It was this last category that piqued Poirot's curiosity. The staffs. Whispers of a family curse tied to an artifact in Sir Reginald's possession had not escaped him. Superstition, perhaps, but Poirot never dismissed a detail. No matter how fanciful it seemed, as he moved deeper into the library, his attention was drawn to a mahogany desk near the far wall. It was an imposing piece, cluttered with papers, an inkwell, and a brass letter opener shaped like a dagger. Poirot's gaze fell on a small, leather-bound journal tucked beneath a stack of documents. Its cover was worn, the edges frayed, as if it had been handled often but with care. He opened it, revealing pages filled with elegant, looping handwriting. The entries were dated, spanning several years, and the name at the top of the first page sent a shiver of recognition through him. Clara Beaumont. Poirot settled into the chair behind the desk, adjusting his pince-nez glasses, and began to read. The journal was not a diary in the traditional sense, but a collection of reflections, observations, and cryptic notes. Lady Clara had written of her life before Ravenwood, her travels across Europe, and her encounters with Sir Reginald Harrow. The entries hinted at a shared history, one marked by ambition, betrayal, and a scandal that had been buried decades ago. One passage, dated 5 years prior, caught Poirot's eye. Reginald thinks he can erase the past by locking it away, but some secrets refuse to stay buried. The artifact he covetes the eye of Anubis carries more than a curse. It is a reminder of what we did, what we stole, and the price we paid. I see it in his eyes when he looks at me. Guilt, fear, and something darker. He knows I know, and that knowledge is my power. Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. The Eye of Anubis. The name resonated with the staff's tales of a cursed artifact in Sir Reginald's collection. But Lady Clara's words suggested something more tangible. Scandal, perhaps a crime, tied to this object. He turned the pages, searching for more, but the entries grew increasingly fragmented, as if Clara had written in haste or fear. One line, scrawled in a trembling hand, stood out. The truth is in the manor, hidden where no one looks. He closed the journal, his mind racing. The Eye of Anubis was likely a relic from Sir Reginald's archaeological pursuits. A man whose wealth came from plundering ancient sites. But what was the scandal? And how did it connect to Lady Clara's disappearance? Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled, and let his thoughts wander. The library, with its silent rows of books, seemed to hum with possibility. His reverie was interrupted by a soft creak. Poirot's head snapped up, his senses alert. The sound had come from the far end of the room, near a bookshelf that stood slightly askew. He rose, moving with the grace of a cat, and approached the shelf. The creak came again, faint but unmistakable. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he examined the bookshelf. It was heavy, carved from dark wood, and laden with volumes, but something about its position seemed off, as if it had been moved recently. He ran his hand along the edge of the shelf, feeling for irregularities. His fingers brushed against a small lever, cunningly concealed behind a false book spine. With a gentle tug, the lever clicked, and the bookshelf swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. Poirot's heart quickened, though his expression remained impassive. A secret passage in Ravenwood Manor was hardly surprising, but its discovery, in the library, so close to Lady Clara's journal, was no coincidence. The passage was dark, its walls damp and cool to the touch. Poirot retrieved a small flashlight from his pocketer, habit born of years. Investigating in unpredictable place, Cézanne stepped inside. The beam illuminated a stone corridor that descended at a gentle slope. The air was musty, heavy with the scent of earth and time. He moved cautiously, his footsteps muffled, aware that this discovery could be the key to unlocking the mystery. The passage ended abruptly at a blank stone wall. Poirot frowned, sweeping the flashlight across the surface. There were no visible seams, no hidden levers, a dead end, Yet the presence of the passage itself suggested purpose. He returned to the library, closing the bookshelf behind him, and stood in silence, considering. The journal, the passage, the artifact, they were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. Poirot returned to the desk, his eyes falling on the journal once more. He flipped to the final entry, dated the day before the gathering. At Ravenwood, it read, "Tonight I confront him. The eye must be returned, or the truth will come out. I have hidden what I know where no one will find it, lest they know where to look. If I am gone, let this be my legacy. The truth will not die with me." The words sent a chill through Poirot. Lady Clara had known she was in danger. She had come to Ravenwood not as a guest, but as a player in a dangerous game. The journal was her insurance, a breadcrumb trail for someone clever enough to follow, and Poirot was nothing if not clever. He pocketed the journal, ensuring it was secure, and turned his attention to the rest of the library. If Clara had hidden something, it would be here, in this room of secrets. He began a meticulous search, checking behind paintings, under rugs, and inside the hollows of furniture. Hours passed, the storm outside growing fiercer, its howls a counterpoint to the silence within. At last, his persistence was rewarded. Beneath a loose floorboard near the fireplace, Poirot found a small metal box, its surface engraved with the same symbol he had seen in the dining room, a circle bisected by a jagged line, like a broken hourglass. Inside the box was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, and a small, intricately carved key. The paper bore a list of names, some familiar: Sir Reginald Harrow, Lady Clara Beaumont, and a third, Dr. Malcolm Vance. Beside each name was a sum of money, written in red ink, and a single word: debt. Poirot's mind raced. Dr. Vance, the second guest to vanish, was connected to this scandal. The key, small enough to fit a lockbox or a hidden compartment, suggested another secret waiting to be uncovered. But it was the list that intrigued him most. A debt, financial or otherwise, could be a motive for murder or for staging a disappearance. To silence a threat, as he pondered, a shadow moved at the edge of his vision. Poirot spun, his flashlight catching the glint of eyes in the doorway. It was Miss Evelyn Carter, Sir Reginald's ward, her pale face framed by dark curls. She clutched a shawl around her shoulders, her expression a mix of fear and curiosity. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here so late?" Poirot smiled, his manner disarming. "The library, mademoiselle, is a place of answers, and I am seeking them. Tell me, have you ever noticed anything unusual about this room?" Evelyn hesitated, her eyes darting to the bookshelf. I don't know. Sir Reginald spends hours here, sometimes at night. He says it's his sanctuary. But I've heard noises, like footsteps, when no one should be here." Poirot nodded, filing the information. Away, and Lady Clara? Did she ever speak of this library, or of secrets she might have kept here? Evelyn's gaze dropped. She was secretive, always watching, always listening. She asked me about Sir Reginald's collection once, about the artifacts. I thought it was just curiosity, but now her voice trailed off, and she shivered. "Mercy." "Mademoiselle Poirot said gently, 'You have been most helpful. Now I suggest you return to your room. The night is no place for wandering in Ravenwood Manor.'" She nodded and slipped away, leaving Poirot alone with his thoughts. The library had yielded its secrets, but each answer brought new questions. The journal, the passage, the box, the keys, They were threads in a tapestry of deceit. Lady Clara had known too much, and someone had ensured her silence. But was she truly gone, or was this, as Poirot suspected, an elaborate ruse? He left the library, the journal and box tucked safely in his coat, and made his way to his room. The storm outside raged on, but within Poirot's mind, a different storm was brewing, storm of logic, deduction, and the relentless pursuit of truth. The clue in the library had set him on a path, and he would follow it, no matter where it led. The night was far from over, and Hercule Poirot was only beginning. Chapter 8. The shadow of motive. The air in Ravenwood Manor was thick with tension, a palpable weight that seemed to press against the ornate walls of the grand dining hall. The chandelier above, its crystals glinting like watchful eyes, cast a fractured light over the gathered guests. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the long mahogany table, his small, precise figure commanding the room despite its modest stature. His moustache, impeccably groomed, twitched slightly as he surveyed the faces before him, each one a mask of unease, suspicion, or carefully guarded secrets. The disappearance of Lady Clara Beaumont had shaken the household, and the subsequent vanishing of Dr. Malcolm Vance had turned unease into outright panic. The guests, a collection of Sir Reginald Harrow's closest associates, sat in uneasy silence, their eyes darting between one another and the empty chairs where Clara and Malcolm once sat. Sir Reginald himself, the industrialist whose wealth had built this imposing manor, sat at the opposite end of the table, his face a storm cloud of frustration and fear. His wife, Lady Evelyn Harrow, clutched a glass of wine, her knuckles white. The others, Mr. Charles Grayson, a financier with a sharp tongue, Miss Eleanor Finch, a novelist with a penchant for drama, and Mr. Victor Langston, a retired diplomat, with a cryptic smile, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the manor staff, hovering at the edges of the room, seemed to hold their breath. Poirot's voice, calm and measured, cut through the silence like a blade. "Mies Amos," he began, his Belgian accent lending a melodic quality to his words. "We find ourselves in a most peculiar situation. 2 of our number have vanished, and the circumstances defy explanation. Yet I, Hercule Poirot, assure you that there is no mystery that cannot be unravelled by the application of logic and the little grey cells." A murmur rippled through the group. Charles Grayson leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Logic, Poirot, with all due respect, we're dealing with locked rooms and curses. This is beyond reason." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Au contraire, Monsieur Grayson. It is precisely reason that will lead us to the truth. But first, we must examine the motives that bind us all to this affair. For where there is a crime, there is always a motive, and where there is a motive, there is a shadow that betrays the guilty." He paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking against the polished floor. "Let us begin with Lady Clara Beaumont, a woman of charm, yes, but also of secrets. Who among you knew her best? And who among you had reason to wish her gone?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Lady Evelyn's glass trembled slightly, and she set it down with a clink. "This is absurd," she said, her voice sharp. "Clara was a dear friend. None of us would harm her." "Perhaps," Poirot said, tilting his head. "But friendship, like love, can hide darker truths. Tell me, Lady Evelyn, what was the nature of your husband's business dealings with Lady Clara?" Sir Reginald's head snapped up. "What are you implying, Poirot?" "Clara was a partner in some of my ventures. Nothing more. Nothing more." Poirot's tone was deceptively mild. Yet I have learned from the Manor's accounts examined with the permission of your butler, Monsieur Hargreaves, that Lady Clara invested a significant sum in your latest venture, a venture that has not yet borne fruit, a venture, perhaps, that was not as secure as she was led to believe. Sir Reginald's face reddened. Are you accusing me of swindling her? That's preposterous. Poirot raised a hand. I accuse no one yet. I merely observe. And I observe that money, mise Amos, is a powerful motive. But there are others. Love, for instance, or betrayal. His gaze shifted to Eleanor Finch, whose pen had stilled in her notebook. She had been scribbling throughout the evening, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Mademoiselle Finch, Poirot said, you are a writer of stories, are you not? Stories of passion, of deceit. Did you, perhaps, know of Lady Clara's romantic entanglements? Eleanor's lips parted, then closed. I don't know what you mean, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Poirot smiled faintly. Do you not? Then allow me to refresh your memory. Lady Clara was once engaged to a certain gentleman who is present in this room. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto Victor Langston. The diplomat's smile faltered, though only for a moment. That was a long time ago, Poirot, he said smoothly. Clara and I parted ways amicably. Amicably. Poor eyebrow arched. Yet I have heard whispers from the staff, who hear much and say little, that you and Lady Clara had a heated exchange just before her disappearance. A lover's quarrel, perhaps. Victor's jaw tightened. You're grasping at straws, Poirot, am I? Poirot's voice was soft, almost gentle. Then let us turn to another matter. Dr. Malcolm Vance, a man of science, yet he too has vanished. Why? What did he know, or what did he possess, that made him a target? Charles Grayson snorted. You're spinning tales now, Poirot. Malcolm was a bore, always prattling about his research. If anything, he annoyed someone to death. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Monsieur Grayson, your disdain for Dr. Vance is noted, but perhaps you had reason to dislike him. I understand that he was advising Lady Clara on her investments that, as we have established, were tied to Sir Reginald's ventures. Did you, perhaps, resent his interference in your financial affairs? Grayson's face darkened. This is ridiculous. I had nothing to do with either disappearance. Poirot nodded, as if conceding the point, but his expression suggested otherwise. He turned to the staff, who stood silently at the edges of the room. Monsieur Hargreaves, he called to the butler, a gaunt man with a perpetually sombre expression. You have served Sir Reginald for many years. Tell me, have you ever heard of a dispute between Dr. Vance and any of the guests? Hargreaves hesitated, his eyes flickering to Sir Reginald. I cannot say, sir. It is not my place to speak of such things. But it is your place to assist in the pursuit of truth, Poirot said firmly. Come, monsieur. A word, gestures something you have seen or heard. The butler shifted uncomfortably. There was a conversation. Overheard, not intended. Dr. Vance and Lady Clara in the library 2 nights ago. They spoke of a documenta contract, I believe. Dr. Vance seemed agitated. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A contract, most interesting. And where is this contract? Now, I do not know, sir, Hargreaves said quickly. I only heard fragments. Poirot nodded, his mind clearly racing. He turned back to the guests. A contract, a quarrel, a disappearance. These are not isolated events, mise Amos. They are threads in a tapestry, and I, Hercule Poirot, will weave them together." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the group. Lady Evelyn's hands twisted in her lap, and Sir Reginald's gaze was fixed on the table, as if searching for answers in the grain of the wood. Eleanor Finch's pen began to move again, her eyes darting between Poirot and the others. Victor Langston's smile had vanished entirely, replaced by a guarded expression. Charles Grayson leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his face a mask of defiance. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let us consider the facts," he said. Lady Clara vanishes from a locked room, leaving only a blood-stained scarf. Dr. Vance disappears under similar circumstances. The manor is filled with whispers of a curse, of an ancient artifact in Sir Reginald's collection, and yet I do not believe in curses. I believe in human nature, greed, jealousy, revenge. These are the forces that drive men and women to act, to deceive, to destroy. He stopped, turning to face the group. But to uncover the truth, we must dig deeper. We must examine not only the motives, but the means. The locked room, the sealed windows. These are not miracles, they are tricks, designed to mislead. And I, Hercule Poirot, am not so easily misled. He moved to the center of the room, his gaze sweeping over the guests. Tonight, we will reconstruct the events of Lady Clara's disappearance. We will return to the scene of the crime, the drawing room where she was last seen. I ask you all to accompany me. There was a murmur of protest, but Poirot's authority was undeniable. The group rose, their movements reluctant, and followed him down the corridor to the drawing room. The room was as it had been the night of Clara's disappearance. Heavy velvet curtains, drawn tight. The door locked from the inside, the windows sealed. The blood-stained scarf still lay on the floor, a stark reminder of the mystery. Poirot knelt beside the scarf, his fingers brushing the fabric. "This scarf," he said, "is a clue, but not in the way you think. The blooded is real. Yes, but its placement is deliberate. It was meant to shock, to distract, but from what?" He stood, moving to the strange symbol etched into the floor, a circle bisected by a jagged line, with smaller markings radiating from its center. "And this," he said, "this symbol, the staff, speak of a curse, but I see something else. A signature, perhaps, or a misdirection." He turned to the group, his eyes sharp. "Who among you has knowledge of such symbols? Who among you has studied the occult or the history of this manor?" The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Eleanor Finch spoke first, her voice hesitant. "I have written about such things in my novels. But it's fiction, Poirot. I don't know anything about real curses." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Fiction, mademoiselle, often conceals truth. Tell me, what inspired this symbol?" "In your stories," Eleanor hesitated. "I based it on old alchemical texts. It's a symbol of transformation, of change, but I've never seen it used in real life." "Transformation," Poirot mused. "Most interesting. And you, Monsieur Langston? As a diplomat, you have traveled widely. Have you encountered such symbols in your journeys?" Victor shook his head. "I'm no scholar of the occult, Poirot. My interests lie in politics, not mysticism." Poirot nodded, but his expression suggested he was not entirely convinced. He moved to the windows, running his fingers along the frames. "Sealed," he murmured, "and yet someone entered this room or left it without using the door, or so it appears." He turned abruptly, his gaze locking onto Sir Reginald. Monsieur Poirot, you have lived in this manner for many years. You collect artifact objects of power, some might say. Is there something in your collection that could explain these events? Sir Reginald's face darkened. I've told you, Poirot, this talk of curses is nonsense. My collection is a hobby, nothing more. A hobby, Poirot said softly. Yet hobbies can become obsessions, and obsessions can lead to dangerous acts. He stepped back, addressing the group as a whole. We have motives, a plenty-money, love, betrayal. We have a locked room and a missing woman. And now we have a second disappearance. But I, Hercule Poirot, see a pattern emerging. The scarf, the symbol, the contract, they are pieces of a puzzle, and I am close to solving it. He paused, letting the silence stretch. But I require one more piece. Monsieur Hargreaves, bring me the guest list from the night of the dinner. And you, Lady Evelyn, tell me where. Were you at the precise moment Lady Clara disappeared? Lady Evelyn's eyes widened. I was in the dining room with the others. Were you? Poirot's voice was sharp. Or were you, perhaps, elsewhere? In the library, perhaps, with Dr. Vance. Her face paled. I don't know what you're talking about. Poirot smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We shall see, madame, we shall see. The investigation continued late into the night, with Poirot moving from room to room, questioning each guest, examining every detail. The manor seemed to close in around them, its shadows lengthening as the hours passed. The guests grew increasingly agitated, their carefully constructed facades beginning to crack under Poirot's relentless scrutiny. In the library, Poirot found a clue that shifted the entire investigation. Tucked behind a row of books was a small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was Lady Clara's, and the entries detailed her growing unease about her investment in Sir Reginald's venture. One passage, dated just days before her disappearance, caught Poirot's eye. I fear I have been deceived. The contract is a lie, and Malcolm knows it too. He says we must confront Reginald, but I am afraid. There is something dark in this house, something that watches us all. Poirot closed the journal, his mind racing. The contract, the disappearances, the symbol, they were all connected. But how, and who was pulling the strings? He returned to the dining hall, where the guests had gathered once more. The atmosphere was electric, charged with fear and suspicion. Poirot stood before them, the journal in his hand. Mies, Amos, he said, I have found a piece of the puzzle. Lady Clara feared for her life, and she was not alone. Dr. Vance shared her fears. But why? What did they know that made them targets? He held up the journal. This book speaks of deception, of a contract that was not what it seemed. And I believe that someone in this room knows the truth. The guests erupted into protests, each denying any involvement. But Poirot's eyes were fixed on one person, Sir Reginald's secretary, Mr. Thomas Reed, who had been conspicuously silent throughout the evening. Monsieur Reed, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the chaos. You have been very quiet, yet you are always present, always watching. Tell me, what do you know of this contract? Reed's face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. I'm just a secretary, Monsieur Poirot. I handle Sir Reginald's correspondence, nothing more. Nothing more. Poirot's tone was sceptical. Yet you were seen near the drawing room on the night of Lady Clara's disappearance, and you have access to every part of this manor. Do you not? Reed's composure faltered. I was doing my duties. I had no reason to harm anyone. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low and intense. But you had a motive, did you not? A motive tied to Lady Clara, to Dr. Vance, to the secrets they uncovered. Tell me, Monsieur Reed, what is the true nature of Sir Reginald's venture? The room fell silent, all eyes on Red. The secretary's face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. I don't know what you mean, he said, but his voice was strained. Poirot's smile was cold. Then allow me to enlighten you. The venture was a fraud, was it not? A scheme to defraud investors, including Lady Clara, and when she and Dr. Vance discovered the truth, they became a threat that had to be eliminated. Sir Reginald leapt to his feet. This is outrageous. My ventures are legitimate, are they? Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. Then why did Lady Clara write of deception? Why did Dr. Vance speak of a contract that was a lie? And why, Monsieur Reed, did you go to such lengths to make their disappearances appear supernatural? Reed's face crumpled, and for a moment it seemed he might confess. But then he straightened, his expression hardening. You have no proof. Poirot, this is all speculation. Poirot nodded, as if conceding the point. Perhaps, but I have one more question. The symbol in the drawing-room, why was it placed there? Was it to frighten us, to make us believe in a curse? Or was it something more personal? He turned to Eleanor Finch. Mademoiselle, you said the symbol represents transformation, but in your novels it also represents revenge. Is that not so? Eleanor's eyes widened. I suppose so. Poirot nodded. And revenge, mise, Amos, is a powerful motive. A motive that could drive someone to orchestrate a disappearance, to create a mystery that would distract from the truth. He turned back to Reed. Monsieur Reed, you are a man of many talents. You handle Sir Reginald's affairs with precision. You know every secret of this manor. And you have a past that connects you to Lady Clara. Reed's face went white. What are you talking about? Poirot's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. You were once her confidant, were you not? Before she broke your heart, before she turned to Victor Langston. And when she came to this manor, when she began to uncover the truth about the venture, you saw an opportunity for revenge. The room was silent, the guests frozen in place. Reed's eyes darted to the door, as if considering flight. But Poirot's presence held him rooted to the spot. You staged the disappearances, Poirot continued. The locked room, the blood-stained scarf, the symbol, they were all part of your plan. You used your knowledge of the manor to create an illusion, to make us believe in a curse. But there is no curse. There is only you. Reed's composure shattered. You can't prove any of this, he shouted, his voice echoing in the vast room. Poirot's smile was triumphant. Oh, but I can, Monsieur Reed, for I have found the one thing: you could not hide the truth in your own actions. He turned to the group. Tomorrow we will search this manor from top to bottom. We will find Lady Clara and Dr. Vance, and we will uncover the mechanism of your deception. And you, Monsieur Reed, will face the consequences of your actions. The room erupted into chaos, with shouts and accusations flying. But Poirot stood unmoved, his eyes fixed on Reed, who seemed to shrink under the weight of his gaze. The shadow of motive had been cast, and the truth was beginning to emerge from the darkness. As the night wore on, Poirot retreated to his room, his mind still turning over the pieces of the puzzle. The contract, the symbol, the scarf, They were all part of a larger design, one that he was determined to unravel. And though the path to the truth was fraught with deception, Hercule Poirot knew that his little grey cells would lead him to the heart of the mystery. The next morning, the search began in earnest. Poirot, accompanied by Hargreaves and a reluctant Sir Reginald, combed through the manor's many rooms, their footsteps echoing in the vast halls. The guests were confined to the dining hall under the watchful eye of the staff, their protests ignored. In the drawing-room, Poirot examined the fireplace, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings. "There is something here," he murmured, "something that does not belong." He pressed a panel, and with a soft click, a section of the wall swung open, revealing a narrow passage. Hargreaves gasped, and even Sir Reginald looked stunned. "A secret passage," Poirot said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. "But where does it lead?" They followed the passage, their lanterns casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. It wound downward through the bowels of the manor until it ended at a heavy wooden door. Poirot pushed it open, revealing a small, dimly lit cellar, and there, bound and gagged but alive, were Lady Clara and Dr. Vance. Poirot's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Mies Amos," he said, "the mystery is solved, but the story is not yet complete." He turned to Hargreaves. "Fetch the others. It is time for the truth to be revealed." Within the hour, the guests were gathered in the dining hall once more, their faces a mixture of shock and relief as Lady Clara and Dr. Vance were brought before a justum. Reed stood apart, his expression one of defeat. Poirot addressed the group, his voice ringing with authority. The disappearances of Lady Clara and Dr. Vance were no supernatural event. They were the work of a cunning mind, a mind that sought to conceal a crime with the illusion of a curse. "Monsieur Reed, you used a secret passage to spirit them away, staging their disappearances to distract from your true motive, revenge." He held up the journal. Lady Clara discovered that Sir Reginald's venture was a fraud, a scheme to defraud investors. Dr. Vance, her confidant, confirmed her suspicions. You, Monsieur Reed, could not allow them to expose the truth, for it would ruin you as well as Sir Reginald. And so you acted. Reed's shoulders slumped. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he muttered. "I just wanted to scare them, to keep them quiet." Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "But you went further, did you not? The blood-stained scarf, the symbol they were meant to terrify, to make us believe in a curse. And yet they were your undoing, for they led me to you." He turned to the group. The motive was revenge, but also greed. Monsieur Reed sought to protect his position, his livelihood, but in doing so, he betrayed himself. Lady Clara, her voice trembling, spoke for the first time. "You were my friend, Thomas. How could you do this?" Reed's eyes filled with tears. "I loved you, Clara, but you chose him." He gestured toward Victor Langston, who looked away. Poirot shook his head. "Love, when twisted, becomes a dangerous thing, but justice, Mies Amos, is clear. Monsieur Reed will face the consequences of his actions, and order will be restored." As the authorities were summoned and Red was taken away, the manor seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The guests, shaken but safe, began to disperse, their secrets laid bare. Sir Reginald, his face ashen, promised to make amends to his investors. Lady Clara and Dr. Vance, though shaken, were unharmed, and Hercule Poirot, his work complete, stood alone in the dining hall, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The shadow of motive had been illuminated, and the truth had prevailed, as it always did when the little grey cells were at work. Chapter 9. The impossible footprints. The snow fell steadily outside Ravenwood Manor, cloaking the grounds in a pristine, unbroken white. Inside, the atmosphere was anything but serene. The disappearance of Lady Clara Beaumont had left the guests in a state of uneasy quiet, their conversations hushed and their glances furtive. The grand dining room, where they had last seen her, still bore the remnants of the interrupted dinner, half-empty wineglasses, plates of congealing food, and the faint scent of roasted pheasant lingering in the air. Poirot stood by the tall, arched window in the drawing-room, his small, precise hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the snow beyond the glass. The manor's heavy silence was broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire in the hearth and the soft tread of footsteps as the guests milled about, each pretending to occupy themselves while awaiting the next development. Inspector Harold Grayson, the local law enforcement officer summoned earlier that day, paced near the fireplace, his broad shoulders hunched and his brow furrowed. He was a man of action, not accustomed to mysteries that defied straightforward solutions. "Mr. Poirot," he said, his voice tinged with frustration, "we've searched every inch of this blasted manor. No sign of Lady Clara, no sign of a struggle beyond that scarf, and no way anyone could have left this house without leaving tracks in the snow. It's been falling all evening. No one's gone in or out." Poirot turned from the window, his moustache twitching slightly as he regarded the inspector. "And yet, Inspector Grayson, the absence of evidence is itself a form of evidence, is it not? The snow, it tells a story. Or perhaps it refuses to tell one. That is what intrigues Hercule Poirot." Grayson snorted, clearly unimpressed by cryptic musings. "Stories won't find a missing woman. We need facts." The room was locked, the windows sealed, and that strange symbol on the floor well. "It's odd, but it doesn't tell us where she's gone." Poirot's eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity. "Patience, mon ami. The facts, they are like the pieces of a puzzle. They do not reveal their meaning until they are placed in the correct order. And this symbol, it is not merely ordered, is a clue, perhaps the key to unlocking this mystery." The symbol in question had been the subject of much discussion since its discovery in Lady Clara's room, etched faintly into the polished wooden floor near the foot of the bed. It resembled a crude spiral intersected by 3 jagged lines, like a fractured star. The staff had whispered of it being tied to the Harrow family curse, a tale of vengeful spirits and ancient artifacts that Sir Reginald's late father had supposedly brought back from an expedition to the Far East. Poirot, however, was not one to play stock in ghost stories. To him, the symbol was a deliberate mark, left by a human hand for a human purpose. But what that purpose was, he had yet to determine. The drawing-room door swung open, admitting Sir Reginald Harrow himself. The industrialist's usually impeccable appearance was slightly dishevelled, his tie loosened. His greying hair mussed as though he had run his hands through it repeatedly. "Poirot," he said, his voice strained, "have you made any progress? My guests are growing restless, and I cannot have this shadow hanging over my home. Lady Clara is a dear friend. Her disappearance is intolerable." Poirot inclined his head politely. "Monsieur Harrow, rest assured, the little grey cells, they are at work. But I must ask, when did you last see Lady Clara before she vanished?" Sir Reginald frowned, his eyes darting to the side as though searching his memory. "At dinner, of course. She was seated across from me, next to Dr. Vance. She seemed preoccupied, perhaps, but nothing out of the ordinary. We spoke briefly about her recent travels to Paris. And did she mention anything unusual? A concern, perhaps, or a person she had encountered? Nothing specific, Sir Reginald replied, though his hesitation suggested otherwise. She was her usual charming self, though perhaps a touch quieter than usual. Poirot nodded, filing the information away. Sir Reginald's reluctance to elaborate was noted, but Poirot did not press. Not yet. Instead, he turned his attention to the other guests who had gathered in small clusters around the room. There was Miss Evelyn Carter, the young heiress with a sharp tongue and a penchant for scandal. Mr. Julian Whitmore, a financier with a reputation for ruthless ambition. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, Sir Reginald's widowed sister-in-law, whose cold demeanour hid a keen intellect, and Dr. Malcolm Vance, the reserved physician who had been seated beside Lady Clara at dinner. Each had been questioned, their alibis scrutinized, yet none had provided a crack in the mystery. As Poirot observed them, a faint commotion arose from the hallway. One of the maids, a young woman named Elsie, burst into the room, her face pale, and her hands trembling. "Sir, Mr. Poirot," she gasped, "you must come quickly outside, in the snow. There's footprints." The room erupted into murmurs as the guests crowded toward the door. Inspector Grayson was already moving, barking orders to his constable to fetch lanterns. Poirot, with his characteristic calm, adjusted his coat and followed at a measured pace, his eyes bright with curiosity. Outside, the cold bit at their faces as they gathered on the manor's front steps. The snow continued to fall, though lighter. Now, dusting the ground with a fresh layer, Elsie pointed toward the east side of the manor, where a low stone wall separated the formal gardens from the open lawn. There, illuminated by the flickering light of the lanterns, was a set of footprints, clear, distinct, and utterly baffling. They began abruptly in the middle of the lawn, as though someone had materialized out of thin air and stretched for perhaps 20 paces before stopping just as suddenly. No tracks led to or from the prints. They existed in isolation, a solitary trail in the snow that led nowhere. The guests gasped and whispered, some crossing themselves, others muttering about the curse. Even Inspector Grayson looked unnerved, his earlier skepticism giving way to a furrowed brow. Poirot knelt beside the footprints, heedless of the snow soaking into his trousers. He studied them closely, noting their size, shape, and depth. They were small, perhaps those of a woman or a slender man, and the impressions suggested a light step, as though the person had been moving quickly. But what fascinated Poirot most was their placement. "Impossible," he murmured, though his tone held no trace of disbelief, only intrigue. "Impossible, indeed." Sir Reginald exclaimed, his voice rising. "No one could have made those tracks without leaving a trail to or from them. It's as if they appeared by magic." Poirot rose, brushing snow from his knees. "Magic, Monsieur Harrow, is merely a trick we do not yet understand. These footprints, they are not the work of spirits, but of a clever mind, perhaps, but a human one." Grayson scoffed. "Human or not, they don't make sense. We've had men watching the doors. All evening, no one's left the house." "Then perhaps," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing, "the answer lies not in who left the house, but in how the footprints were made." He turned to Elsie, who stood shivering in her thin shawl. "Mademoiselle, when did you discover these?" "Tracks, just now, sir," she replied, her voice trembling. I was fetching coal from the shed when I saw them. They weren't there an hour ago, I swear it." Poirot nodded, his mind already turning over the possibilities. An hour ago, the snow had been falling more heavily, enough to obscure any tracks within minutes. Yet these prints were crisp, untouched by the fresh snowfall. That suggested they had been made recently, very recently. But how, and by whom? He glanced back at the manor, its dark silhouette looming against the pale sky. The guests were huddled together, their faces a mixture of fear and fascination. Poirot's gaze lingered on each in turn, searching for a telltale sinner, nervous glance, a too casual posture. But they were all performers in their own way, masking their thoughts behind carefully constructed facades. Inspector Poirot said, "I suggest we return inside. The cold, it is not conducive to clear thinking, and there is much to consider." Grayson grumbled but complied, ushering the guests back into the warmth of the manor. Poirot lingered a moment longer, his eyes fixed on the footprints. They were a challenge, a taunt from the culprit, daring him to unravel their secret. And Hercule Poirot was not a man to back down from a challenge. Inside, the guests reconvened in the drawing room, their nerves frayed by the discovery of the footprints. The fire had been stoked, casting a warm glow over the room, but it did little to dispel the chill of unease. Poirot stood near the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression one of serene confidence. He had not yet spoken, but the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his verdict. Miss Evelyn Carter was the first to break the silence. "Mr. Poirot, surely you don't believe those footprints were made by a ghost? All this talk of curses, it's nonsense, isn't it?" Poirot tilted his head, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Mademoiselle, I believe in what the evidence tells me. And the evidence, it tells me that someone wishes us to believe in the supernatural. But Hercule Poirot, he is not so easily deceived." Mrs. Beatrice Langley, seated in a high-backed chair, raised an eyebrow. "Then how do you explain them? Those footprints appeared out of nowhere. Even you can't deny that." "I deny nothing," Poirot replied smoothly, "but I question everything. The footprints, they are not the mystery, they are the solution. They are a message left for us to decipher." "A message?" Julian Whitmore interjected, his voice sharp. "From whom? Lady Clara, or someone else?" Poirot's smile widened, though it held no warmth. "That, Monsieur Whitmore, is what we must discover. But first, let us consider the facts. Lady Clara vanishes from a locked room. A blood-stained scarf is found, but no body. A strange symbol is etched into the floor. And now, footprints appear in the snow, leading nowhere. These are not random events. They are connected, woven into a tapestry of deception." Dr. Malcolm Vance, who had been silent thus far, cleared his throat. "Mr. Poirot, I'm a man of science. I don't hold with curses or ghosts. But those footprints, they defy logic. Could they be a prank? Someone trying to frighten us?" Poirot's eyes flickered toward the doctor, assessing him. A prank, perhaps, or a distraction, but for what purpose? That is the question. And to answer it, we must look not only at the footprints, but at the people in this room. The guests shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. Poirot's words had struck a nerve, reminding them that one among them might be responsible for Lady Clara's disappearance, perhaps something worse. Over the next hour, Poirot moved methodically through the manor, examining the grounds from every angle. He requested a ladder and, to the bemusement of Inspector Grayson, inspected the exterior walls of the manor, particularly those near the east lawn where the footprints had appeared. He studied the windows, the eaves, even the drain pipes, his keen eyes missing nothing. The snow continued to fall, but lightly now, preserving the footprints for further study. Back inside, he gathered the guests once more, this time in the library. The room was lined with towering bookshelves, their contents a testament to Sir Reginald's eclectic tastestomes on history, art, and the occult, alongside novels and scientific journals. Poirot stood before a large oak table, upon which he had placed a single item, a small, ornate key, discovered earlier that day in Lady Clara's room, tucked beneath the edge of the rug. This key, Poirot said, holding it up for all to see, is another piece of our puzzle. It does not fit the lock of the door to Lady Clara's room, nor any other door in this manor that we have yet found. But it is significant, Nan. Why was it hidden, and what does it unlock? Sir Reginald frowned, leaning forward. I've never seen that key before. It doesn't belong to any of my collection. Perhaps, Poirot said, it belongs to something else. Something hidden, something secret. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Poirot's gaze swept the room, noting the reactions of each guest. Miss Carter's eyes widened slightly, Mr. Whitmore's lips tightened. Mrs. Langley's expression remained impassive, and Dr. Vance shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Now, Poirot continued, let us return to the footprints. They are, as you say, impossible. But impossibility, mise amis, is merely a challenge to the intellect. Let us consider how such footprints might be made. A person could not simply appear in the middle of the lawn and vanish again without leaving a trail. Therefore, we must ask, how might the illusion of such footprints be created? He paused, letting the question sink in. One possibility is that the footprints were made from above. A rope, perhaps, or a ladder lowered from a window, allowing someone to step onto the snow without disturbing the surrounding area. Grayson shook his head. We checked the windows, all locked, no signs of tampering. Indeed, Poirot said, but there are other ways. A device, perhaps, to press footprints into the snow from a distance, or a clever manipulation of the snow itself to make it appear undisturbed. The guests exchanged skeptical looks, but Poirot pressed on. Or perhaps the footprints are not what they seem. Perhaps they were made earlier, before the heavy snowfall, and preserved in some way, covered, protected until they were meant to be discovered. That's absurd, Whitmore said, his tone dismissive. Who would go to such lengths? And why? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Why, indeed? To frighten, to confuse, to distract. The footprints, they draw our attention outward, to the snow, to the idea of an intruder or a supernatural force. But perhaps the truth lies closer within. These walls, among us. As the evening wore on, Poirot's investigation deepened. He questioned Elsie again, learning that the coal shed was near the east lawn, its door facing the direction of the footprints. He examined the shed itself, noting scuff marks in the snow nearby, faint but present. They were not footprints, but rather irregular patches, as though something had been dragged or brushed across the surface inside the manor. Poirot returned to Lady Clara's room, accompanied by Inspector Grayson. The blood-stained scarf still lay on the bed, its crimson stain stark against the white linen. Poirot examined it closely, noting the pattern of the blood smeared, not splattered, as though applied deliberately. He then turned his attention to the symbol on the floor, tracing its lines with a gloved finger. "This symbol," he said, "it is not random. It is precise, deliberate. It is meant to be seen, to provoke fear. But it is also a distraction, Nan, a way to make us look at the flaw, at the curse, and not at the truth." Grayson sighed. "And what is the truth, Mr. Poirot? I'm at my wit's end." Poirot smiled faintly. "The truth, Inspector, is that this is a crime of misdirection. The locked room, the scarf, the symbol, the footprints, they are all parts of a performance. And, like any performance, they require a stage, props, and an actor. We must find the actor." By midnight, the manor was quiet, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Poirot sat alone in the library, a single lamp casting shadows across the room. Before him lay a notebook, its pages filled with his neat, precise handwriting of the symbol, notes on the footprints, and a list of the guests' alibis. He closed his eyes, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, and let his mind wander through the maze of clues. The footprints were the key. They were too perfect, too deliberate. They were not the result of chance or accident, but of careful planning. Someone had wanted them to be found, to spark fear and confusion, but who and how had they done it? He thought back to the coal shed, to the scuff marks in the snow. They suggested movement, activity, but not the kind that left clear footprints. Perhaps a tool, a rake, or a board used to smooth the snow, creating the illusion of an undisturbed surface. But that alone would not explain the footprints themselves. They required a mechanism, a method to press them into the snow without leaving. A trace of the maker. Poirot's eyes snapped open. A memory flickered our conversation earlier that day with Sir Reginald's secretary, Mr. Thomas Reed, a quiet, unassuming man who had been conspicuously absent during the discovery of the footprints. Reed had mentioned, almost in passing, his interest in mechanical devices, a hobby he pursued in his spare time. Could such a device, a stamp, perhaps, or a mould be used to create footprints from a distance? Poirot rose, his movements brisk. He needed to see the coal shed again to confirm his suspicions. Slipping on his coat, he stepped outside, the cold air sharp against his skin. The snow had stopped, leaving the ground silent and still. He made his way to the shed, his lantern, casting a narrow beam of light. Inside, the shed was cramped, filled with sacks of coal and gardening tools. Poirot's eyes scanned the space, landing on a wooden crate tucked in the corner. He opened it carefully, revealing a curious object, a flat, rectangular frame with a rubber sole attached, shaped to resemble a human footprint. Beside it was a long pole, lightweight but sturdy, and a bundle of cloth strips, likely used to smooth the snow. Poirot's lips curved into a satisfied smile. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "the impossible, it becomes possible." The next morning, Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing-room once more. The atmosphere was tense, the weight of the previous night's discovery hanging over them. Inspector Grayson stood by the door, his arms crossed, while Sir Reginald paced near the fireplace, his face drawn. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his presence commanding despite his small stature. "Madame et messieurs," he began, "we have been presented with a mystery that appears insoluble. A woman vanishes, a room is locked, a symbol is etched, and footprints appear where none should be. But I, Hercule Poirot, have seen through the veil of deception." He held up the rubber-soled frame, retrieved from the coal shed. The guests gasped, their eyes wide. "This," Poirot said, "is the tool of our culprit. A device to create footprints in the snow pressed from a distance, using a pole to avoid leaving other marks. The snow was smoothed with cloth to erase any trace of the device's use. A clever trick, Nan, but not clever enough. Sir Reginald's face paled, but who would do such a thing? Poirot's gaze settled on Thomas Reed, who stood near the back of the room, his face impassive. "Monsieur Reed," Poirot said, his voice sharp, "you have been most discreet, but your discretion betrays you. It was you who crafted this device, you who placed the footprints to suggest an otherworldly presence. And it was you who orchestrated the disappearance of Lady Clara." Reed's expression flickered, a momentary crack in his calm facade. "That's preposterous," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Poirot stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Reed's. "You spoke to me of your interest in mechanics, monsieur. A hobby, you said. But it is more than that, is it not? It is a skill, one you used to create this illusion. And the symbol in Lady Clara's room, another of your creations, designed to fuel the rumors of a curse. But why? That is the question. And the answer, it lies in the past you share with Lady Clara." The room was silent, all eyes on Reed. He opened his mouth to protest, but Poirot raised a hand. "Do not deny it. I have seen the records in Sir Reginald's library, the letters you thought hidden. You and Lady Clara were once close, were you not? Until she betrayed you, leaving you to face ruin while she rebuilt her life. This weekend, you saw your chance for revenge, to make her disappear, to frighten the others, to cast suspicion on a curse or an outsider." Reed's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he muttered. "I just wanted her to feel fear, to know what it was like." Poirot nodded, his expression softening slightly. "And so you staged the disappearance, using the scarf and the symbol to create a mystery. But Lady Clara, she is not dead, is she? She is hidden, somewhere in this manor, waiting to be found." Inspector Grayson stepped forward, his face grim. "Where is she, Reed? Tell us now." Reed hesitated, then sighed. "The cellar. There's a hidden room behind the wine racks. She's there, with Dr. Vance." The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. Grayson barked orders, and within minutes, constables had retrieved Lady Clara and Dr. Vance from the cellar, both shaken but unharmed. The truth unraveled swiftly. Reed had drugged their wine at dinner, using a mild sedative to render them unconscious, then moved them through a concealed trapdoor in the library, a relic of the manor's older days. The footprints, the symbol, the scarfall were distractions, designed to obscure his actions and cast suspicion elsewhere. As Reed was led away in handcuffs, Poirot turned to Sir Reginald. "Monsieur, your manor is free of curses, but not of secrets. Perhaps it is time to bring them all into the light." Sir Reginald nodded, his face weary but relieved. "Thank you, Mr. Poirot. I don't know how you do it, but you've saved us all." Poirot inclined his head, his moustache twitching with a hint of pride. "It is merely a matter of order and method, mon ami. The little grey cells, they never fail." And with that, the mystery of the impossible footprints was solved. The manor restored to peace at least, until the next enigma crossed Hercule Poirot's path. Chapter 10. The little grey cells at work. The air in Ravenwood Manor was thick with tension, the kind that seemed to cling to the heavy velvet drapes and seep into the polished mahogany floors. The guests, once vibrant with the anticipation of a luxurious weekend, now sat in a state of uneasy quiet, their faces etched with suspicion and fear. To disappearances Lady Clara Beaumont and Dr. Malcolm Vance had shattered the illusion of safety within the manor's ancient walls. The discovery of the blood-stained scarf, the strange symbol on the floor, and the impossible footprints in the snow had only deepened the enigma. Hercule Poirot, however, was undeterred. His small, precise figure stood in the centre of the grand parlour, his eyes gleaming with the quiet intensity of a man whose mind was a machine in motion. Poirot had excused himself from the company of the guests after dinner, retreating to a quiet corner of the manor's library. The room was a sanctuary of knowledge, its towering shelves laden with leather-bound tomes, their spines gilded with age and wisdom. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls, but Poirot paid it no mind. He sat at a small, intricately carved desk, his hands folded neatly before him, his moustache impeccably trimmed, as always. To an outsider, he might have appeared idle, even bored, but those who knew him understood that this was the moment when his little grey cells were at their most active. He closed his eyes, allowing the chaos of the past 2 days to settle into an orderly pattern in his mind. The facts, he reminded himself, were the foundation of any investigation. The emotions, the superstitions, the whispers of curses, these were distractions, mere fog to be cleared away. He began to catalogue the clues methodically, as one might arrange pieces on a chessboard before a critical move. First, there was a letter that had summoned him to Ravenwood Manor. It had been cryptic, unsigned, and written in a hand that suggested both urgency and secrecy. "Come to Ravenwood," it had read, "for a matter most grave awaits your expertise." Poirot had initially dismissed it as a prank, but the mention of Sir Reginald Harrow, a man whose wealth and influence were matched only by his penchant for collecting rare artifacts, had piqued his curiosity. The letter had been the first thread in the tapestry of this mystery, and Poirot was certain it held significance beyond its words. Next, the disappearance of Lady Clara Beaumont. The woman, with her sharp wit and enigmatic smile, had vanished from her locked bedroom during the first night's dinner. The room had been secured from the inside, the windows sealed, and the only clue left behind was a silk scarf, stained with blood that had yet to be identified. The door, when broken open by the butler, Mr. Grayson, had revealed nothing but an empty room and a strange symbol circle, bisected by a jagged line etched into the floorboards beneath the rug. The symbol was unfamiliar to Poirot, but its precision suggested intent, not accident. Then there was Dr. Malcolm Vance, the second to vanish, a man of science, reserved and analytical. He had disappeared from the billiard room the following evening, again under impossible circumstances. The room had been locked, the windows barred, and yet he was gone, leaving behind only a faint trace of cigar smoke and a single overturned chair. The guests had begun to whisper of the supernatural, their fears fueled by the manor's staff, who spoke in hushed tones of a curse tied to an artifact in Sir Reginald's collection, a jade amulet said to have belonged to an ancient cult. Poirot's lips twitched beneath his moustache. A curse, indeed. He had no patience for such nonsense. The human mind, he knew, was far more cunning than any ghost or spectre. The clues were there, waiting to be connected, and he would find them. He opened his eyes and reached for the small notebook he always carried. In it, he had jotted down observations about the guests, each of whom had a motive tied to Lady Clara's past. Sir Reginald himself, the host, was a man of immense wealth but guarded secrets. His business dealings with Lady Clara's late husband had been lucrative but fraught with tension, and there were rumors of a financial dispute that had never been resolved. Miss Eleanor Tate, the young heiress, had been Lady Clara's protégée, but her admiration had soured into resentment when Clara had refused to support her latest venture. Mr. Julian Carver, the charming but debt-ridden playwright, had been romantically linked to Lady Clara, though their affair had ended abruptly months before. And then there was Mrs. Beatrice Langley, Sir Reginald's sister, whose cold demeanour toward Lady Clara suggested a personal grudge, perhaps tied to the scandal hinted at in the journal Poirot had found in the library. The journal itself was a critical piece of the puzzle, tucked behind a false panel in the library's bookcase. It had belonged to Lady Clara's father, a man who had been Sir Reginald's business partner decades ago. The entries spoke of a betrayal deal gone wrong, a fortune lost, and a vow of revenge. The journal had ended abruptly, its final page torn out, but it had confirmed Poirot's suspicion that the past was very much alive in Ravenwood Manor. He turned his attention to the footprints in the snow, a detail that had sent the guests into a frenzy. They had appeared overnight, leading from the manor's rear entrance to the edge of the frozen lake, where they abruptly stopped. No body had been found, no tracks led away, and the snow had been undisturbed, except for that single, inexplicable trail. The guests had called it the work of a spirit, but Poirot's mind was already forming a different theory. Footprints could be manipulated, just as alibis could be crafted. And then there was the clock in the dining room, stopped at precisely midnight. It had struck Poirot as odd from the moment he noticed it. The manor staff insisted it had been working perfectly the day before, yet now it sat frozen, its hands pointing to the witching hour. A coincidence? Poirot did not believe in coincidences. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled before him. The pieces were disparate, but they were beginning to form a picture. The symbol, the scarf, the footprints, the clock, the journal, all were threads in a web woven by a human hand, but whose and why? The fire in the hearth had burned low, and the library was growing cold. Poirot rose, his movements deliberate, and paced the room. He paused by the fireplace, his eyes drawn to the intricate carvings on the mantel. A faint memory stirred something about the fireplace in the dining room where the clock stood. He had noticed a similar carving there, a subtle pattern of vines and leaves that seemed out of place in the otherwise austere room. Could it be? He returned to the dining room, where the guests had gathered earlier that evening. The room was empty now, save for the faint hum of the wind outside. The clock still stood silent, its hands unmoving. Poirot knelt by the fireplace, his fingers tracing the carvings. There a slight indentation, barely noticeable unless one knew to look for it. He pressed it, and with a soft click, a panel slid open, revealing a narrow passage. His heart quickened, but he maintained his composure. The passage was dark, its walls damp and cold, and it descended into the bowels of the manor. Poirot retrieved a small flashlight from his Paquita habit, born of years of unexpected discoveries, stepped inside. The passage wound downward, its steps uneven, until it ended abruptly at a stone wall. A dead end, or so it seemed. But Poirot was not so easily fooled. He examined the wall, his fingers probing for another hidden mechanism. Sure enough, a second panel gave way, revealing a small chamber inside. He found a curious sight, a collection of props, including a length of rope, a vial of red liquid that smelled faintly of iron, and a small metal tool shaped like the symbol, etched into Lady Clara's floor. There was also a notebook, its pages filled with diagrams of the manor's layout, including the locations of hidden passages and trapdoors. Poirot's lips curved into a satisfied smile. The little grey cells had not failed him. He returned to the library, the notebook tucked safely in his coat. The props and the diagrams confirmed his growing suspicion. The disappearances were not supernatural but the work of a meticulous planner. The bloodstained scarf, the symbol, the footprints all were designed to create an illusion of the impossible, to distract from the truth. But who among the guests had the cunning to orchestrate such a scheme? Poirot considered the alibis again. Each guest had accounted for their whereabouts during the disappearances, but alibis could be falsified, witnesses swayed. He recalled the behaviour of Sir Reginald's secretary, Mr. Arthur Wells. The man had been unobtrusive, almost invisible, throughout the weekend, yet he had been present at every key moment. He had been the one to suggest breaking down Lady Clara's door, the one to point out the footprints in the snow. His demeanour was calm, too calm, as if he knew more than he let on. Poirot's mind flashed to the journal. The scandal it described had involved not only Sir Reginald and Lady Clara's father, but also a third party, a trusted confidant who had been betrayed by both. Could Mr. Wells be connected to that past? The secretary's family history was largely unknown, but Poirot had overheard a passing remark from Mrs. Langley about Wells' father, a man who had once worked for Sir Reginald and left under mysterious circumstances. The pieces were falling into place. But Poirot needed one final confirmation. He returned to the parlour, where the guests were gathered, their faces pale in the flickering candlelight. He stood before them, his posture erect, his voice calm but commanding. "Madame et messieurs," he began, "the events of this weekend have been most perplexing, but I, Hercule Poirot, have begun to see the truth. The disappearances of Lady Clara and Dr. Vance are not the work of a curse or a spirit, but of a human mind, a mind most cunning and devious." The guests stirred, their eyes darting to one another. Mr. Wells, seated in the corner, remained still, his expression unreadable. Poirot continued, pacing slowly before the fireplace. "The clues, they are many, but they point to one conclusion. The blood-stained scarf, the symbol on the floor, the footprints in the snow, these are not mysteries, but distractions, designed to obscure the truth. And the truth, mise Amos, lies in the past." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "The journal I found in the library speaks of a scandal, a betrayal that cost a man his fortune and his honour. That man, I believe, was connected to someone in this very room." Mrs. Langley gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You cannot mean, Poirot interrupted, "that the past has a way of returning, like a shadow that cannot be outrun. And I believe that shadow has been cast by someone who knows this manor better than most." He turned abruptly to Mr. Wells. "Monsieur Wells, you have been most helpful in pointing out the clues, but perhaps too helpful. The footprints, the scarf, the symbol, did you not think it convenient that you were always the first to notice these things?" Wells' face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "I don't know what you're suggesting, Monsieur Poirot." "I suggest," Poirot said, his voice rising, "that you have orchestrated this entire affair. The hidden passage, the props, the notebook, they all point to you. You used your knowledge of the manor's secrets to stage the disappearances, to create the illusion of a curse. But why? That, I think, lies in the journal and in the betrayal of your father by Sir Reginald and Lady Clara's father." The room erupted in murmurs. But Poirot raised a hand for silence. The little grey cells, they do not lie. You sought revenge, did you not, Monsieur Wells? Revenge for a wrong done long ago, a wrong that cost your family everything. Wells stood, his face pale but composed. You have no proof, Poirot. This is all speculation. Speculation. Poirot's eyes gleamed. None. The notebook in the hidden chamber bears your handwriting. The tool used to etch the symbol matches. One found in your room. And the clock stopped at midnight. Was you who tampered with it to create a sense of foreboding, was it not? Wells opened his mouth to protest, but Poirot pressed on. You used a concealed trapdoor in Lady Clara's room to spirit her away, and another in the billiard room for Dr. Vance. You hid them in the cellar, alive but bound, to prolong the terror. But you made one mistake, Monsieur Wells. You underestimated Hercule Poirot. The guests gasped as Poirot gestured to the butler, who had been waiting in the shadows. Mr. Grayson, if you please, bring the victims to us. Moments later, Lady Clara and Dr. Vance were led into the room, dishevelled but unharmed. The guests erupted in relief, but Poirot's eyes remained fixed on Wells, who had begun to tremble. You see, Poirot said softly, the little grey cells, they always find the truth. You sought to punish those who wronged your father, but in doing so, you became the villain of this tale. Wells collapsed into his chair, his composure shattered. It was for justice, he whispered. They ruined him. They ruined us all. Poirot shook his head. Justice, monsieur, is not served through deception and fear. It is served through the truth, and the truth has been revealed. As the guests began to murmur among themselves, Poirot turned to Sir Reginald. I suggest, monsieur, that you contact the authorities. Mr. Wells will answer for his crimes, and order will be restored to Ravenwood Manor. Sir Reginald nodded, his face a mask of shock and gratitude. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You have saved us all. Poirot inclined his head, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. The little grey cells had done their work, and the mystery of Ravenwood Manor was solved. As the guests dispersed, their voices a mix of relief and disbelief, Poirot returned to the library, his mind already turning to the next challenge. For Hercule Poirot, there was always another puzzle, another truth waiting to be uncovered.